Chapter 2102. It's just that I can't release myself in certain aspects. I'm too stressed and nervous, and I've created a sense of mental oppression on myself. Old Five smiled with a you-know-what-I-mean expression in his eyes. It's not very serious. At its worst, I've swallowed a few sleeping pills. Shin Luoan said, if you continue to talk nonsense, you can forget about this month's salary.
Oh. Jin Yang was not afraid at all.
I'm just explaining it to your wife. You and your wife haven't been together for so long, and you've been abstinent for 2 years. Think about it, how can a normal man endure it for so long? That's right, Lao Wu interrupted. We're explaining it to you. If your wife misunderstands something, it'll be a big deal. Aha, Jin Yang echoed. Shen Manting couldn't help but interrupt when she saw the two of them echoing each other. Didn't you say that sleeping pills will kill you?
Jin Yang laughed.
Ahem, Lao Wu coughed lightly. How should I put it? He just wants to sleep. He still has a son to raise, so he can't bear to die.
Oh!
Shen Manting suddenly felt sad when she heard that. She reached out and hugged Shin Luoan's arm. Shin Luoan's face was already dark. He looked at the two of them and said, Are you done? Don't. Sister-in-law is still here. Lao Wu nudged Jin Yang. Jin Yang immediately nodded. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Jin Yang. I just joined the team 2 years ago. Have you had lunch? We haven't eaten yet. Come and help us. Lao Wu took off his gloves and mask, revealing his full beard. Shen Manting didn't expect such a face under his mask. She blinked. However, she vaguely felt that it was very familiar. Lao Wu noticed that Shen Manting was staring at him. He touched his beard and said, You've grown again. You're sexier than 2 years ago, aren't you? Sexier? Shen Manting wanted to laugh. When she was about to say something, Shin Luoan pulled her aside. Don't talk to them. They're not good people. Shin Luoan went to the disinfection cabinet and took out a mask and gloves. Sit here and don't touch anything. Many things are more dangerous.
Oh!
Shen Manting was very obedient and sat aside. Jin Yang and Shin Luoan exchanged some information and then swaggered away. Shen Manting sat at the small bar counter and rested her face on her hands. She watched Shin Luoan work hard, and her eyes were filled with fascination. Ever since she woke up, he had been the one taking care of her. He was gentle, considerate and understanding. Yet, she accepted all of his kindness as a matter of course. She didn't expect that he also had depression. Shen Manting didn't like the word depression very much. She didn't know where she came from, but she felt that people with this disease would die easily. Looking at him, she felt her heart ache. Shen Luoan wore gloves and held the white mouse in his hand. No one knew what he was doing. But Shen, she thought. She couldn't help but smile sweetly. Suddenly, she wanted to call out to him. As soon as this thought came to her, she moved faster than she realized. Hubby. Of. Chapter 2103. After shouting these words, Shen Manting automatically covered her entire face. His eyes darted left and right like a thief. Shin Luoan couldn't help laughing when he saw her cute little face. Then, he looked around just like her and put his finger to his lips. Shen Manting immediately understood. She covered her mouth and blinked her eyes. Shen Luoan whispered, Most of the people here are single. If you do this, they will take revenge on me. Shen Manting was shocked. She immediately covered her mouth and didn't dare to say a word. How could the people here be so cruel? How could they take revenge? Her big eyes were full of anger. Shin Luoan saw it and chuckled. But soon, he lowered his head and continued to work. Shin Luoan didn't let Shen Manting wait for long. After Lao Wu and Jin Yang came back from dinner, he immediately returned them. In the face of their protests, he arrogantly swaggered and said, My wife is here. I have to accompany her. I will come back tomorrow. After that, he swaggered away with his wife under the envious eyes of all the people in the laboratory. Shen Manting felt that people behind her were looking at her. She timidly held Shin Luoan's arm. But in her heart, there was a kind of excitement of doing bad things and bullying people. She laughed all the way. When she walked out of the door,
She threw herself into Shen Luoan's arms and shouted, "Honey!"
Ha!
Shen Luoan gently stroked her cheek with his palm and looked at her tenderly.
What's wrong?
Shen Manting grabbed the clothes around his waist with both hands, stood on tiptoe, and kissed his lips.
She kissed him jerkily.
Her movements were clumsy, but they easily stirred up his heart. Shen Luoan immediately wrapped his arms around her waist, clasped her head with one hand, and gave her a deep and long kiss. Shen Manting's breathing was short, and her whole body was tense. But at the same time, she felt an unprecedented excitement.
Oh!
There was a teasing voice. Shen Luoan immediately let go of Shen Manting and looked back. 3 or 5 people came out from inside. They looked at them with mischievous eyes and said, "Hello, boss madam.
We are just passing by. You can continue."
Continue? Shen Manting's face was already red with embarrassment. She grabbed his clothes and buried her face in his arms. He waited until the footsteps of his fellows were far away before he dared to raise his head. She looked at Shen Luoan and asked, "Are we going home now?"
Do you want to go home?
asked Shen Luoan. Shen Manting wanted to go home to watch a movie and see her son. But when she saw the deep passion in his eyes, she couldn't bring herself to say it. His face burned even hotter as he said, "Then don't go home for now."
What are we going to do then?
Shen Luoan looked at her.
How about we get a room? Get a room?
All of a sudden, Shen Manting felt her body heat up. The result of last night's indulgence was that her lower body was still a little sore. Upon hearing this, she immediately pushed him away and rebuked, "I'm going to ignore you." Shen Manting strode forward with heavy footsteps. Shen Luoan couldn't help but laugh. He pulled her back and said, "I'm just kidding.
Let's go watch a movie." Watch a movie? Shall we go to the cinema?
Yes.
Great.
Shen Manting was a little excited.
I've never been to a movie theater before.
Let's go, I'll take you there. Chapter 2104. Shen Luoan looked at her with a smile and nodded.
Okay.
When Shen Manting arrived at the cinema, she chose a movie with a name that seemed to suit her taste. It was called Iron Fist of Shame. Shen Luoan didn't object. He bought popcorn and Coke, and Shen Manting asked for ice cream. The movie started, and the audience burst into laughter. However, Shen Manting occasionally asked, "Honey, what does the little egg mean?" Shen Luoan said, "Well, it means that the man is childish." "Honey, she stewed herself in an iron pot, and the water didn't boil. She's so careless." Shen Luoan laughed and hugged her to continue watching the movie. They laughed the whole time, and Shen Manting was very excited when the movie was about to end. "It's back, haha! It's so handsome!" Shen Manting shouted excitedly. Shen Luoan began to doubt his own aesthetics. Is this handsome? But when the leading actor and actress kissed, Shen Manting turned her head and leaned over. "Honey!" Shen Luoan turned his face and was attacked by her small mouth, which was stained with the taste of ice cream and popcorn. Shen Manting was elated. She hugged the popcorn and moved to the side, sticking her tongue out at him. Shen Luoan couldn't help laughing and warned in a low voice, "I'll teach you a lesson when we get back." Shen Manting pretended not to hear, and her eyes returned to the big screen. The movie ended, and Shen Manting was very excited. "Honey, where are we going next?"
Where do you want to go?
"I want to go to the aquarium." Shen Manting's purpose was very clear. Shen Luoan smiled and said, "Okay." The aquarium in the capital was very big. But the only thing that could make Shen Manting stop and watch were the corals swimming up and down like umbrellas. The colorful lights shone on the transparent bodies, which looked particularly gorgeous. Shen Manting's face was almost stuck to the glass, and she exclaimed, "It's so beautiful."
It's dirty.
Shen Luoan put his hand in front of her face.
Do you want to raise a nest at home?
Shen Manting's eyes lit up, and she looked up at him.
Can I?
"Yes," Shen Luoan smiled.
As long as you like it.
"Yes." Shen Manting was very excited.
I like it so much. All right.
Shen Luoan looked at her.
I'll get someone to do it.
Ah! Shen Manting immediately hugged him.
Hubby, you're the best.
As she spoke, she glanced left and right, then quickly tiptoed and kissed him on the lips. Shin Luoan's heart was tickled. He was about to grab her, but she acted like she was playing a prank and immediately let go of him. She jumped to one side and looked at him with a grin. Shin Luoan's smile widened and he said, "Naughty. Come here." "No." Shin Manting clasped her hands behind her back and leaped forward. Gay and innocent as a child. A real child. There was a smile on his face, but he felt a little depressed in his heart. Shin Luoan followed and shouted, "Slow down, don't fall." "I won't." For a date, of course it had to be a romantic candlelight dinner. Shen Luo and took her to the famous revolving restaurant. He sat at the window seat, overlooking the entire capital. Shen Manting looked down, and her face was full of amazement. She said, "Hubby, it's so beautiful." "Do you like it?" "Yes." "If you like it, we'll come often." Shen Luo and looked at her with a smile. "Next time bring our son." Chapter 21:05. When Shen Manting heard this, she quickly looked around and whispered, "Is it expensive here?" "Well, it's not very expensive," Shen Luoan said. Shen Manting looked down and nodded. "Well, if it's not very expensive, let's come here more often. I love it here. It's so beautiful." "Okay." Shen Luo agreed and took a sip of red wine. His eyes were full of tenderness. After dinner, Shen Manting was still in high spirits. She hugged Shen Luoan's arm and said, "Honey, do you have anything else to do besides work and play with the baby?" What did Shen Luoan do when there was no one to date or play with? Shen Manting was very curious. He had a lot of time these days. Most of it was to accompany her. If she hadn't known that he was so busy with work today, she would have thought that he had so much time every day. Shen Luoan looked at her and said with a smile, "When you're not awake, I take the baby to see you and sleep. That's all I do every day." In the past 2 years, he had fallen into self-reproach and depression for nearly a year. During that time, he had thought of committing suicide several times to atone for his sins. However, Little Moon was still young. Finally, under Shen Jilia's guidance and treatment, he slowly improved. However, he was still immersed in work. Work, hospital, home. Every day, he repeated the same days. He was like a soulless puppet, a walking corpse. Fortunately, she woke up. He had fantasized countless times. If she woke up, what kind of hatred would he face from her? How would she blame him? But there was nothing. She had forgotten everything. It was as if all his sins had never happened. Very good, however, now facing the 12-year-old Shin Manting, Shin Luo felt more and more uneasy. It was unknown whether she would wake up and when she would wake up. If she woke up one day, what kind of situation would he face? He didn't dare to think about it. Looking at Shen Manting's incredulous eyes, which seemed to have expected it, his heart softened slightly. He reached out and held her in his arms. He whispered, "I only feel alive when you wake up." Shen Manting was caught off guard by his sudden confession, and her heart ached slightly. She hugged him tightly and didn't make a sound. Shen Luoan closed his eyes and whispered, "Promise me one thing." "Okay." Shen Manting replied in a low voice, "Honey, I'll agree to anything you say." Shin Luoan's heart softened, but at the same time, he felt a dull pain. "Manting, promise me that no matter what happens, you won't leave me, okay?" Shen Manting felt a little baffled, but when she heard his words, she nodded and said, "I promise you, hubby. I won't leave you." "Then remember it." "I'll remember." "Swear it." "I swear." Shen Luoan held her in his arms. He was well aware of the current situation. Everything was too easy. Nothing was going to turn out the way he imagined. Once she sobered up, she would still hate him. Shen Luo felt a little scared. All the happiness she had today was about to become a bunch of bubbles. When she woke up, it would all disappear without a trace. "Manting, I truly love you." Chapter 21:06. "Me too. I love it so much." Her innocent words echoed in Shen Luoan's heart. It was already very late when they got home. Little Moon was still sleeping in his grandparents' room that night. The two of them tiptoed into the room. Shen Manting was so tired that she lay on the bed. Shen Luoan smiled when he saw her like that. You're lying down so soon. You haven't showered yet. No, Shen Manting covered herself with the quilt. I'm exhausted. I just want to sleep. You're sleeping so early. Shen Luowen went up and pressed her down. I want to discuss something with you. Discuss. Shen Manting looked up at him. What is it? You don't have to discuss it with me. Well, this is between the two of us. I can only make a decision after you agree. What? Shen Manting couldn't help but ask curiously. Haven't you always been the one to do whatever you want? I've never had any objections. Shen Luowen was a little restless when he heard her obedient words. He pressed down on her and gently hugged her. He whispered, then let's have a wedding and invite all our relatives and friends to the banquet. Okay. Shen Manting didn't hesitate. After the wedding, we'll go on a honeymoon. Okay. Then. Shen Luowen paused and seemed to be hesitating. He gently leaned over and whispered in her ear, let's have another child. Shen Manting couldn't help but shrink back when she felt his warm breath on her ear. She subconsciously said, okay. Ha. Shen Manting seemed to have realized something. She turned to look at him and said bitterly, don't. I heard that giving birth is very painful. Shen Luowen looked at her and smiled. He gently sucked her plump earlobes. Shen Manting was caught off guard. She felt unbearably itchy. She shrank back and said, go away. Shen Luowen didn't listen to her. He hugged her tightly and slowly moved his lips downwards. They turned into dense kisses on her neck. Yi Qianqian had a dream. In her dream, a cute and adorable child crawled towards her with his bare buttocks. The child's features were exactly the same as Shen Jilia's. Mom! His childish voice sounded childish as he reached out to grab her. Yi Qianqian reached out to him in an attempt to hug him, but the little figure, who was as delicate as jade, was like a bubble. The moment she touched him, he disappeared without a trace. Darkness, it was still darkness. Shen Jilia was by her bedside. He was leaning against the wall and taking a nap. But not long after he fell asleep, he was woken up by a soft sob. With a start, Shen Jilia woke up from his dreams. His gaze fell on Yi Qianqian, who was lying on the bed. No! Yi Qianqian's hands were stretched out as if she was dreaming of something extremely sad. Her hands were flailing, and tears were streaming down her face. Shen Jilia's heart ached. He held her hand with both hands and said softly, Wife Qianqian. Baby. Yi Qianqian's voice was choked with sobs. She felt as if her heart was being choked with sadness. Shen Jilia's heart ached even more, and a silent sourness rose from the bottom of his heart to his eyes. He leaned over and gently hugged her. I'm here. Don't cry, my wife. Yi Qianqian subconsciously hugged him. The next moment, she opened her eyes. She was surrounded by darkness. In front of her was an aura that was so familiar to her bones. Chapter 2107. It was a dream. What a realistic dream. She seemed to really feel that the baby was leaving her. Yi Qianqian gently hugged him and wanted to speak, but she found that her throat was choking. She couldn't say a word. Shen Jilia gently raised his eyes and kissed away her tears gently and delicately. Yi Qianqian broke down and cried bitterly. Be good. Shen Jilia felt as if his heart was being dismembered. It's okay. He'll come back sooner or later. Old Shen. Yi Qianqian hugged him tightly. She was devastated. I'm sorry. What are you talking about? Shen Jilia looked a little angry. It's not your fault. It's me. If I had stayed by your side, nothing would have happened. You can hit me. Qianqian, don't cry. Shen Jilia couldn't hold it in anymore. His voice was choked with sobs. I beg you, don't cry. This is the most important period for a woman. If you hurt your eyes from crying, how am I going to live in the future? A woman had to go through confinement after a miscarriage. During this period, it was the easiest for her to get sick. Just think of it as doing it for me, okay? Shen Jilia hugged her and pleaded. You have to be strong for the sake of our next child. What if you get cataracts and glaucoma from crying and pass it on to the child? Yi Qianqian was crying properly. When she suddenly heard his words, she burst out laughing. He shoved him away, not knowing whether to laugh or cry as he shouted,
Get lost. Shenjilia laughed and continued. That's right. Taking care of your body is more important than anything else. Yi Qianqian couldn't cry anymore after hearing his words. She wiped her eyes and sobbed as she looked at him. Shenjilia also restrained his emotions and asked, Are you hungry? Yes. Then I'll go buy some supper. Wait for me for a while. Don't go. Yi Qianqian looked at him and couldn't help crying again. Did you tell my sister? Shenjilia nodded. She came to see you in the afternoon and sat here for more than an hour. She left when she saw that you didn't wake up. What time is it now? Well. Shenjilia glanced at his watch. 9:30 p.m. Then you, ask Yu to come over and buy some supper on the way. Yi Qianqian wiped her eyes and sniffed. Ask her if Zhenlin is asleep. If he isn't, bring him over. When Shenjilia heard that, he said, Zhenlin is still young. A 2-year-old child should be asleep at this time. Let her bring him over tomorrow. I'll make a call first. Yes. Shenjilia dialed Yi Yuyu's number right in front of Yi Qianqian. However, it took a while before the call was picked up. The person who answered the phone wasn't Yi Yuyu. It was Li Jinnan. Brother-in-law, Li Jinnan called out in a flat voice. Is sister-in-law awake? Yeah, Shenjilia replied. If you and Yuyu have time, come over. Qianqian wants to see your son. All right, wait for us. We'll go now. Li Jinnan had always been straightforward with his words. Sister-in-law just woke up? Yes. Then I'll bring some food along. It's better to cook some porridge at this time. Is porridge okay? Sure. Okay, I'm hanging up. Shenjilia was speechless. Was it Jinnan? Yi Qianqian could tell from the expression on Shenjilia's face. Chapter 2108. Humph, that's a good man. Yi Qianqian felt a little relieved. He's better than your brother. Look at what happened to Yuyu when she married your brother. Now that Sister Manting is married to my brother, isn't that good? It's not good. Look at Manting now. I always feel like he's molesting a child. Shenjilia looked at her and tried to defend Shen Luoen. Like a fish drinking water. You know when it's hot or cold. Yi Qianqian glanced at him and changed the topic. Help me up. I need to go to the bathroom. Shenjilia smiled helplessly. Yes, madam. By the time Li Jinnan and Yi Yuyu arrived, it was already an hour later. In his hand was a big clay pot, hanging from a steel hook. The two of them walked in holding the 2-year-old Li Zhenlin. The little guy had been fed until he was chubby. When he walked in, he looked around with his dark eyes. When he saw Shenjilia, he looked up calmly. Shenjilia raised his eyebrows slightly and said, How long has it been? You've grown quite a bit. Li Zhenlin looked at him without blinking. Call me uncle. Li Jinnan put the clay pot on the table and nudged the child. Li Zhenlin appeared overly calm and obediently called out, Uncle. His voice was neither loud nor soft, and he sounded serious. Shenjilia was speechless. He turned to look at Yi Qianqian and asked, Is Little Moon the only child of his age who develops slowly? Yi Qianqian replied, Perhaps it's because Little Moon doesn't have a mother to teach him. That was the only explanation. Yi Yuyu walked over to Yi Qianqian and looked at her pale face. She felt a little heartache and said, I waited here for you in the afternoon, but I didn't wake up, so I left first. Yi Qianqian looked at Yi Yuyu's increasingly rosy and rounder face and said enviously, Your days are getting better and better. Zhenlin is very sensible, isn't he? It's hard to explain in a few words. Just like his father. Yi Yuyu sighed softly. You must be hungry. I'll wipe your body after dinner. By the way, Dad really wants to know what happened to you. He called me and said that my brother-in-law was fooling him. I don't know what to say. Give Dad a call later, Yi Yuyu said as she looked at Shenjilia. Explain it to Dad. Okay, tomorrow. Shenjilia scooped porridge for everyone and handed a bowl to Zhenlin. Zhenlin reached out and took it. Thank you, Uncle. But very quickly, she carried the bowl to the bedside and said, Mom. She glanced at Yi Qianqian, who was standing behind Yi Yuyu, and gestured to her. She opened her mouth as if she didn't know what to say, but the look on her face had conveyed everything.
Yi Yu took it and whispered, "Is this for Auntie?"
Yeah.
Jian Lin nodded. "For little Auntie." Yi Yu took it and smiled.
All right. Thank you, Jian Lin. Thank you, Jian Lin. Yi Qianqian looked at him.
Her eyes were full of envy, and her heart ached.
She quickly averted her eyes and looked at Shen Jielia.
"Old Shen, feed me."
"Let me do it."
Yi Yu moved a stool over and sat down.
"Brother-in-law has been staying here all day. He must be hungry."
"I'm fine."
Shen Jielia walked over. "I ate something tonight. I'm still full." He took the bowl from Yi Yu's hand.
"Humph.
What did you call me?"
Hubby."
Ah.
Chapter 2109. Although Yi Qianqian's body wasn't feeling well, she was still in good spirits after sleeping for so long. After finishing 2 bowls in one go, he was in high spirits and started chatting with Yi Yu. Li Jianlin was still young, so he was already sleepy. Li Jinan held his son in his arms. The little guy fell asleep, and Shen Jielia chatted with Li Jinan from time to time. They chatted until 11:30 p.m. before Yi Qianqian remembered to ask them to go back. She was reluctant to leave, but she still asked Yi Yu to take the child back to sleep. Yi Qianqian looked at the child in Li Jinan's arms and couldn't help but take a second look.
How blissful. A family of 3. Yi Qianqian sighed.
Yu's life is getting better and better.
What are you envious of? We can do it too.
Shen Jielia tidied up the food.
Do you want some more?
There's still some left.
Yeah. Feed me.
By the time Yi Qianqian was discharged from the hospital, it was already a week later. When she returned to the capital, the whole family gathered around her and asked, "Are you all right? How did you end up in the hospital for so long after a fall?"
That's right.
Grandma was so worried. Old Mrs. Shen looked her up and down.
"Oh my, your little face has lost a lot of weight."
"Oh my." Shen Longyue said, "Since you're back, stay at home for a while.
Get Nanny He to make you some nourishing soup. You don't look too well."
Yeah. Mrs. Shen held Yi Qianqian's hand.
"You have to nourish yourself during this period.
Your grandmother did a divination for you and Jielia yesterday. She said that you might get pregnant this year." When Yi Qianqian heard that, her heart ached. Yes, it was indeed possible to get pregnant this year. Moreover, she was already pregnant. But she had lost it because of her own carelessness. At that thought, Yi Qianqian felt an inexplicable heat that stung her eyes. When Shen Jielia heard that, he hurried forward and said, all right. Qianqian just came back, and she's not feeling well. Why are you all crowding around her and asking her questions? Come. Dear, come with me to my room to rest." As he spoke, Yi Qianqian was pulled away by Shen Jielia. When the family saw this scene, they were all a little surprised. Old Mrs. Shen vaguely sensed that something was amiss and said, "I have a feeling that Jielia is lying to us." "What do you mean by being hospitalized for a fall? His limbs are still fine. How could he be hospitalized for a week after a fall?" Mrs. Shen had been suspicious for a long time, but she could not figure out why. Was it a fall, or an illness, or something else? No one gave them an answer. From beginning to end, Shen Jielia and Yi Qianqian avoided talking about it. When Shin Luo, An and Shin Manting returned home with the baby, they were surprised to see the 3 elders of the family sitting in the living room. Little Moon, who was being carried by Shin Luo N, struggled to get up when he saw the scene. Then she ran over and hugged Mrs. Shen's knees, shouting, "Grandma!" Madam Shen stroked his furry little head and said, "Good boy." Then, she hugged Shen Longyue's thigh. "Grandpa!" Shen Longyue picked him up and said, "In the future, you have to call me great-grandmother first when you enter the house. Do you understand?" Shen Yueshao nodded and looked at old Mrs. Shin. He smiled and said, "Great-grandma." Chapter 2110. Shen Yueshao climbed down from Shen Longyue's knee and ran toward old Mrs. Shin. "The merry-go-round," he exclaimed. Shen Manting saw her son's excited expression. She went up to him and said, "We went to the amusement park and took him on the merry-go-round. Little Moon must be happy, right?" Little Moon's pale face was flushed. He nodded and said, Yes, I'm happy. He pinched the baby's face and said, Dad, Mom, Grandma, I'll go in first. Go ahead, old Mrs. Shen said with a smile. Oh, look at your little face. You're such a good grandson. Come, look at the toys your uncle brought back for you. Old Mrs. Shen carried the little boy into the toy room and opened the box of toys Shinjilia had brought back. Come, do you know how to play with building blocks? Yes. Shen Yuexiao's eyes lit up as he looked at the colorful building blocks in front of him. Shen Luo walked in and said, Grandma, I'll play with Little Moon. You should go and rest first. Why should I rest? I'm just playing a game with my great-grandson. Why are you interfering? Go away. Don't stay here and join in the fun. Shen Luo was chased away mercilessly. He chuckled and said helplessly, All right then. Call me later if you need anything. Go away. Old Mrs. Shen ignored Shen Luo and continued to dismantle the building blocks for her grandson. Do you like this? Yes. Shen Luo watched for a while and returned to the room. Shen Manting sat on the bed and held the little thing she had bought that day in her hand. When she saw Shen Luo come in, she smiled and said, Honey, I want to keep this thing as a souvenir. She stood up as she spoke. She walked to the drawer and pulled it out, revealing a dazzling array of little things inside. They were all little things they had bought when they went out to play. There were small necklaces, key rings, and those little dolls and toys. She carefully put down the tassel pendant in her hand and said, When we're old, we'll be very happy to see all the places we used to go together. Shen Luo's heart softened when he heard this. He gently hugged her waist from behind and whispered, Where did you learn this? Shen Manting blushed slightly and asked, What do you think? Don't you like it? I like it. Shen Luo kissed her ear. I like it so much. It's so romantic. It was so romantic that Shen Luo couldn't even be sure that Shen Manting had prepared this for their happiness. Shen Manting looked at the colorful little things in front of her and smiled contentedly. She said, Then I'll make more in the future. Every time I see these things I feel so happy. Yes, I'm so happy. Shen Luo smiled, but his heart was sad. It was precisely because he was too happy that he felt as if he had stolen all of this. Shen Luo was combing Shen Manting's hair in the room. They talked and did some boring things in the house. Even the two of them didn't know what they were doing. Time passed quickly. Knock. Knock. Someone knocked on the door. It was a little anxious and a little excited. Brother, come out quickly and see what your son has done. When Shen Luo heard this, he stood up and opened the door. Chapter 21:11. Shen Luo leaned over to take a look. It was just a simple 9-grid puzzle. It was very simple. But for a 2-year-old child, it was not easy at all. Shen Luo glanced at it and asked, Little Moon did it himself? Yes. Shen Jilia was a little excited. He looked at him and said, I just bought it. I just took out a 9-grid puzzle for him. Now the little boy is playing with a 16-grid puzzle. Let's go and have a look. Shen Luo was a little excited when he heard that. He followed Shen Jilia to Little Moon's toy room and saw the little boy lying on the ground playing with a puzzle. When he saw Shen Jilia and Shen Luo walk in, he looked up at them and laughed. Daddy, Uncle. What are you playing? Shen Luo walked over and squatted down beside him to look at him. Little Moon looked at him and pointed at the puzzle. Uncle, he said obediently. Did I give it to you? Shen Luo patted his head. Do you like it? Yes, I like it. Little Moon smiled. Shen Luo looked over and found that Little Moon had almost completed the puzzle. The 4 corners were rounded, and the 4 corners had been put together. Are you done? Shen Luo asked. Shen Yuexiao looked at the puzzle in front of him and reached out with the puzzle in his hand. He shook his head and said, No. Then he put the puzzle in his hand under the puzzle on the ground. Shen Jilia and Shen Luo looked at it quietly and soon found that the edges had also been filled in. They found that it was completely accurate and there were no mistakes. He placed the last one down. It was a picture of Grey Wolf. It was very complete and there were no mistakes. Shen Luo looked as if he had expected it, but Shen Jilia laughed and said, Brother, look at this. Shen Jilia pointed to a corner of the room. It was a small house made of Lego. It was very tall and beautiful.
I just bought all these today. Look at how well he did. When Shen Jielia said this, he looked a little proud and said, I told you that my little nephew can't be more stupid than others. Who said that little moon is stupid? Shen Luoan raised his eyebrows. He's always been very smart. He remembers a lot of things once I tell him. You don't play with him often, and you don't even care about your nephew. How dare you say such things? Shen Jielia felt a little awkward. He coughed lightly and said, I just realized that the children of other families are quite smart. Look at O Ming's daughter. She's only 1 year younger than Little Moon, but she already knows how to go to the bathroom by herself. She's also very articulate and quick-witted. Girls speak faster and their brains develop faster, but that's all. Little Moon's IQ is much higher than his peers, Gunyenshin said. Yeah. My sister-in-law's son is pretty smart too. He's Li Jinnan's son. You speak very smoothly and your pronunciation is very accurate. Can he spin the Rubik's Cube? Ah, how would I know? Little Moon already knows how to do that. He can even assemble his own toys. Shen Luoan seemed to be showing off. This child takes after me. He doesn't like to talk, but his brain works faster than yours. Shen Jielia asked, Is there a personal attack? Chapter 21:12. Yes. Shen Jielia was speechless. He looked at him and asked, How are things between you and Sister Manting recently? Call me sister-in-law. Shen Luoan looked at him and stood up. He said softly, Come out with me for a while. Shen Jielia noticed that Shen Luoan's expression seemed to be more serious than before. Shen Luoan quickly walked out of the door and into the courtyard. Jielia. Yes. She seems to be growing up slowly. When she first woke up, she was 12 years old. Now she's grown up, but now she's becoming more and more independent. Shen Luoan reached into his pocket and took out a pack of cigarettes. He took one out and put it in his mouth, but he didn't light it. He looked at him and said, Moreover, she's been having more and more nightmares recently. What kind of nightmares? She's dreaming of the past. Shen Luoan looked at Shen Jielia with a sad gaze. She's dreaming of all kinds of things in the past. Last night, she seemed to have dreamed of the time you took her out to play. She was calling your name. Do you know what she said? What? Shen Jielia asked. When I took her out to play. Yes. She said, Jielia, don't burn it. You can't eat it later. It's all yours. Shen Luoan's voice was a little low. He looked at Shen Jielia and pursed his lips. It happened that year. Do you remember? 3 or 4 years ago, when Yu was still at home. Shen Luoan finally took out a lighter from his pocket. After lighting it, he said softly, It happened so long ago, and it was such a trivial matter. How could she still remember it? I've forgotten it. Shen Jielia was silent. He stared at Shen Luoan and found that there was a smile on his face. But in his eyes, there was a clear sense of loneliness and a touch of fear. It was hidden deep within and difficult to detect. Shen Jielia sighed softly and considered his words before saying, Brother. Yes. Sister Manting has selective amnesia, and she's slowly recovering now. According to what you've described, she usually looks normal, but she dreams every night. Sooner or later, her memory will slowly recover in the form of dreams, Shen Jielia said. She paused for a moment and looked at Shen Luoan, who was looking at her seriously. She said slowly, The reason why she still remembers that kind of thing is perhaps because it's a trivial matter to you, but to her, it's a very precious or very happy memory. That's why it appeared in her dreams. Shen Jielia's words were very light, but every word was like a blunt knife, forcefully stabbing into his heart. Shen Luoan averted his eyes and looked at the lush roses in the courtyard. It was not the flowering season yet, but the branches and leaves were already very lush. He took a long drag on his cigarette, but for some reason, he felt a lump in his throat and choked on the cigarette. He couldn't help but start coughing violently. He choked hard and heavily, and his throat was in severe pain. Unknowingly, she choked on her tears. Perhaps it was because the smoke was too thick, and when it reached her eyes, it became even more uncontrollable. Shen Jielia fell silent and looked at her quietly. After coughing for a long time, Shen Luoan wiped his eyes.
His voice was terrifyingly hoarse as he asked, "Is there any way to keep manting at this stage?" Chapter 21:13. Perhaps it was a selfish idea. But perhaps it was the best idea Xin Luo and could come up with. As long as she couldn't remember, as long as she retained her memories, then everyone could live happily ever after, couldn't they? When Shen Jielia heard Xin Luo and's words, he turned to look at him and frowned. "Brother, are you crazy? This is very unfair to Sister Manting." When Xin Luo heard this, he took another drag of his cigarette and exhaled. He turned to look at Shen Jilia's face. Shen Jilia frowned as if he couldn't understand him. He continued, "Manting's mental state is that of a 12-year-old. What you're doing is no different from child molestation or child abduction." Shen Luoan suddenly laughed. He looked at Shen Jilia and said, "Manting is the mother of my child. I just want her to continue living happily." As he spoke, he looked at the lush foliage in front of him and said softly, "Moreover, how do you know if Manting is willing to regain her memories? Perhaps she prefers her current life. Just like me." They spent every day carefree together. They laughed when they were happy and acted coquettishly when they were unhappy. They lived like a real married couple. Their recent life was the blissful life that he had always dreamed of. He believed that Manting felt the same way. Shen Jilia didn't say anything. He looked at Shen Luoan and sighed deeply as if he had thought of something. Shen Luoan looked at Shen Jilia and walked up to him. He gently patted him on the shoulder and said softly, "Forget it. Don't force yourself." When Shen Luoan finished speaking, he walked up the steps and turned to go back. "Brother," Shen Jilia stopped him and said calmly, "why don't we think of a way to help Sister Manting regain her memories as soon as possible?" Shen Luoan paused for a moment and suddenly laughed. He looked at him coldly and said, "Jilia, you're the crazy one." His tone was a little unfriendly. He looked at Shen Jilia in front of him and his gaze was no longer the same as before. Shen Jilia clearly sensed his displeasure and didn't say another word. Shen Luoan quickly retracted his gaze and turned to go back in. Shen Yuexiao was alone in the room, holding a Rubik's Cube in his hand. When she saw Shen Luoan enter the door, she immediately got up from the ground and went forward shouting, "Daddy!" Shen Luoan's thigh was being hugged by Xiao Yu-er. When he saw Xiao Yuer's little face, his originally cold and displeased expression softened a little. He squatted down, picked up the baby, and walked into the room. Shen Manting was just about to take a shower when she saw Shen Luoan come in with their son in his arms. She leaned forward and kissed the baby. "You haven't taken a shower yet, have you?" "Not yet," Shen Luoan said in a low voice. Shen Manting could smell the tobacco in his mouth. Feeling a little uncomfortable, she frowned and said, "Hubby, you smoked." "Yeah." Shen Luoan looked at her and asked, "You don't like it?" "I think it stinks." "The baby won't like it, right?" Shen Manting looked at the infant and smiled. "Hubby, let's give the infant a bath first. It's so late now. Let's let the infant sleep after bathing." Chapter 21:14. Of course I'm happy. Shen Manting reached out and took the infant into her arms without hesitation. Shen Manting spoke without hesitation. Shen Luoan was silent for a moment. Shen Manting didn't seem to notice Shen Luoan's strange behavior and asked, "What's wrong?" Shen Luoan looked at her and moved his lips, but he quickly held back his words. Shen Manting felt a little strange and asked, "Honey, what's wrong with you today?" Shen Luoan looked at her and thought for a while before he asked with difficulty, "Do you want to regain your previous memories?" Shen Luoan's voice was a little low. He seemed to have thought about it for a long time. Shen Manting felt a little strange and subconsciously looked up at Shen Luoan's expression. At that moment, Shen Luoan seemed to be expressionless, but vaguely, it seemed that there was an indescribable message in his eyes. Shen Manting couldn't fully grasp such a message. However, she could feel his hesitation. She thought about it and replied, "I think it's better for me to regain my memories. After all, we used to be husband and wife. I don't even know what my life was like before. If I regain my memories, will my life be a little more complete? What do you think, honey?" "Yes." Shen Luoan silently agreed. "I feel that I'm missing a lot of memories in my life. From 12 years old to 31 years old, this change is too sudden. Shen Manting pouted. She held the infant in her arms and looked for clothes for him. She rummaged through the wardrobe and said, "It's been 19 years. A lot of things must have happened in these 19 years. If I don't know anything, I'll feel like I'm feeling now. I'll feel empty in my heart." Shen Manting busied herself in front of the wardrobe and didn't look back. Shen Luo and looked at her back and listened to her words. He felt a little sad in his heart. What if all you remember are unhappy things? Shen Luoan's voice was a little hoarse as he slowly walked forward. If the things that you're about to remember bring you only unhappiness and pain, would you still be willing to remember them? How could that be? Shen Manting smiled and said, "Those are also my memories. Even if they are painful and unhappy, these memories are still mine. If they are not, then they are incomplete. For example, I feel that I am still 12 years old, but you tell me that I am already 31 years old. Although I am very happy now, sometimes I still feel that I am very childish. I don't like this feeling." Just like now, although she was holding her own son in her arms. She knew that she had given birth to this child, but she still didn't have the awareness of being a mother. Apart from the fact that the child was calling her mother, she didn't think there was any difference. If she left now, there wouldn't be any mother's love that couldn't be severed like what the TV shows said. Moreover, from the age of 12 to the age of 31, there are 19 years. During these 19 years, there must be a lot of things happening. Some are unhappy, and some are happy. Why don't I recover my memory? Shen Manting had already found clothes. She held the child's clothes and turned around, only to find that Shen Luo and was looking at her deeply. She couldn't tell what kind of expression was in his eyes. Chapter 21:15. Shen Manting felt that Shen Luo An's behavior was a little strange. She said coquettishly, "Come and hug our son. My arms are sore." Shen Luo An walked forward and gently hugged her and his son. His action was a little sudden, and Shen Manting could sense that he was a little sad. Shen Yuexiao also reached out to hug Shen Luo An and called out, "Daddy." Shen Luo An nodded and closed his eyes. "Little Moon, do you love your mother?" "I love Mommy. I love Daddy," Shen Yuexiao shouted. "Daddy, Mommy, Little Moon loves you." The latter part of her sentence was a little soft, as if she was afraid that she would say something wrong. She was a little timid and careful. Shen Luoan smiled silently, but his eyes were filled with bitterness. "Then let Daddy and Mommy take you to take a bath." "Yes," Shen Yuexiao answered loudly. Shen Luo An carried the baby over to her. "Did you have fun today?" "I'm happy." Shen Yuexiao had a smile on his face. He looked at Shen Luoan and said, "The wooden horse is fun. Then I'll take you there often." And the night was deep. Shen Luoan lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Shen Manting was sleeping beside him. She gently leaned over and hugged him. "Hubby, are you in a bad mood tonight?" she asked softly. Every night, Shen Luoan would pester her, push her down, and then pin her under his body. What was going on today? Shen Manting could sense that he was feeling down, so she hugged him tighter. Shen Luoan pressed her hand down, turned around, and kissed her lightly on the lips. "Do you like being with me?" "I like it." She leaned over and kissed him gently on the lips. "Don't you like me anymore, hubby?" "Why would I?" Shen Luoan's voice was low and hoarse. "I like it very much. I've always liked it." "Yes," Shen Manting replied. Her face was a little hot. "Hubby, my waist is so sore. Can you massage it for me?" Without waiting for Shen Luoan's reply, she reached out and pulled his hand to hers. He placed his palm flat on the back of his waist and said, "Rub." Shen Luoan switched from being passive to being active. He pressed down on her with a moderate amount of force. Shen Manting felt very comfortable. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed his lips. During this period of time, she had learned everything she should and shouldn't know. Under Shen Luoan's guidance, she felt a little addicted to it. Her slender legs separated his legs and squeezed herself in. Then, she gave him a long and deep kiss. Shen Luoan remained passive, which made Shen Manting feel a little frustrated. She quickly broke away from him and said, "Hubby, aren't you coming today?" "Do you like it?" Shen Luoan suddenly asked. Do you really like this kind of thing? Shen Manting's face was flushed from the kiss. She looked at him, and her eyes were particularly bright in the night. Shen Luoan's throat tightened. In an instant, he pressed her down and gave her a deep, lingering kiss. His hand moved from the back of her waist all the way down. Without much foreplay, it could even be said to be a little rushed. Shen Luoan tore off the cloth beneath her and entered her. Shen Manting groaned. She felt a little uncomfortable and said, "Hubby." Shen Luoan's lips fell densely on her upper body, igniting clusters of flames. Chapter 21:16. Shen Luoan asked again, "Do you like it?" Shen Manting felt that Shen Luoan was a little strange today. It was not only because of what he said at night, but also because of his abnormal behavior tonight. Even if he did not always take the initiative to ask for it, he would never be in a completely passive state like today. Shen Manting panted slightly and did not speak when she heard this. Shen Luoan suddenly became heavy, and Shen Manting could not help but let out a moan. "Manting." Shen Luoan leaned over to her ear and whispered, "Do you like it? Tell me, do you like it?" "Ah." Shen Manting pinched his arm with both hands. "Honey, honey." Shen Luoan's movements became heavier and faster. Shen Manting could not avoid his ferocious attacks at all. Finally, under his questioning, she finally gasped and said, "I like it." "What?" Shen Luoan approached and said in a low voice, "I didn't hear you clearly." "I like it, so, like it, slow down." Shen Luoan could not help but kiss her lips. In the last moment of madness, he reached the clouds with her. After it was over, Shen Luoan got up and reached for the bedside table to find a pack of cigarettes. Shen Manting was wrapped in the quilt. When she saw Shen Luoan pick up the pack of cigarettes, she asked, "Honey, are you smoking again?" "If you don't like it, I won't smoke." Shen Luoan took out a cigarette and put it in his mouth. Shen Manting looked at him with a pair of straight eyes and said softly, "I don't like it." Shen Luoan looked at her sideways. He did not light the cigarette. He just took 2 puffs of the cigarette and then took it away. "Is the smell very strong?" Shen Manting still looked at him and reached out to hold his hand. Shen Luoan followed her hand and pinched the cigarette. He broke it and threw it away. The dean used to have a father, but he smoked too much and his lungs were black. The hospital couldn't cure him, so he died. Shen Manting looked at him and said, "I think the dean's father died a little unjustly. He was quite a good man, but he died because of smoking. You should also stop smoking." Shen Luoan smiled and said, "I won't smoke to death." The dean's father said the same thing, but he still died in the end. Shen Manting looked at him. "Don't smoke anymore." As she spoke, she frowned and said, "Hubby, my waist is getting more and more sore. Help me massage it." Again. Shen Luoan raised his eyebrows and put the pack of cigarettes away. Then, he lay down and reached out to touch the back of her waist. "I don't want to come. I'm not feeling well today." Shen Manting was very honest. She frowned and then said, "Hubby, did I play too long today? The roller coaster was a little dangerous. Did I hurt my waist?" "Get up. Let me take a look." Shen Luoan lifted the blanket and asked her to turn away. Suddenly, Shen Manting exclaimed, "Ah, hubby." Shen Manting jumped up from the bed and stared in disbelief at the bed she had just been lying on. "Hubby, there's blood." Shen Luoan followed her gaze and saw a patch of dark red at first glance. Startled, she lifted the blanket. He discovered that it wasn't just a patch of red. There were also scattered patches of water stains mixed with red blood. It looked a little scary. "Hubby." Shen Manting covered her mouth with an obvious look of fear on her face. "What should I do? I'm bleeding. You poked me and I'm bleeding." Chapter 21:17. Shen Luoan was stunned at first, but when he heard Shen Manting's words, he laughed out loud. Shen Manting's little face was full of fear. Looking at Shen Luoan, who was laughing mercilessly in front of her, Shen Manting was annoyed. She pounced on him and shouted angrily, "Honey!" Shen Luoan couldn't help it. He held her with both hands and leaned back. However, this kind of laughter was getting louder and louder, and Shen Manting felt a little despised. Her cheeks were red from laughing, and she pressed her whole body on Shinluo and said angrily, "Stop laughing."
What are you laughing at?
Her eyes unconsciously turned red, and Shen Manting gritted her teeth angrily. She sat down heavily on his body and shouted, "Don't laugh anymore, don't laugh anymore." Her voice was anxious and annoyed, and there was a hint of anger. As she spoke, she clenched her hands into fists and hit him. Shen Luo and caught her hands and wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. Then he said, "You!" When he was about to speak, his eyes saw the appearance of Shen Manting in front of him. He suddenly couldn't help laughing out loud. Shen Manting was about to cry. Seeing Shen Luoan like this, she was extremely angry and pouted with red eyes. "Stop laughing." Okay. Shen Luoan immediately became serious and held her. "I won't laugh anymore." Shen Manting looked at him and pouted.
What should I do? You poked me and made me bleed.
Now I feel pain in my stomach and it's still bleeding. What should I do? Shen Luoan finally stopped laughing, but he suddenly couldn't help laughing again. But when he saw Shen Manting was about to cry, he immediately restrained the smile on his face and said, "It's okay, it's okay.
It's okay."
Then he helped her up and glanced at his waist and abdomen. The place where she had just sat was already a bloody red. Shen Manting saw this and felt even more helpless. She said, "My stomach hurts."
It's okay.
Shen Luoan saw her fear and said softly, "Come on, get up first.
Let's go take a shower together."
Okay. Shen Manting got up and was then led into the bathroom by Shen Luoan.
Shen Luoan took a quick shower.
After casually washing up, he told Shen Manting that he was going to take a shower. When he returned, he was holding a bag of something dark blue in his hand. Shen Manting thought it looked familiar and asked, "What is this?" "Sanitary napkin." Shen Luoan handed her a towel.
Hurry up and wipe yourself clean. Put on your clothes. I'll teach you how to use it.
Oh. Shen Manting watched him unwrap the package and couldn't help but ask, "Is this the thing that Mom put in our cabinet a few days ago?"
That's right.
Shen Luoan sighed in his heart.
Mother is more considerate. She even thought of this aspect. It's come in handy so quickly.
What is this aspect? A woman's normal physiological detoxification occurs once a month, Shen Luoan explained to her.
Every woman has a few days like this. You'll be fine once you use this.
Oh. Shen Manting was a little curious, but she quickly put on her clothes. Shen Luoan unwrapped one and taught her how to use it. The operation was very simple, and Shen Manting quickly mastered it.
Chapter 21:18.
Shen Manting looked at his meaningful expression and said weakly, "Honey, I seem to be bleeding again. This thing doesn't seem to be able to stop the bleeding." Shen Luoan couldn't help laughing.
This thing doesn't stop the bleeding. It just absorbs your blood after it flows out. Don't be afraid. You'll be fine in a few days.
Shen Manting didn't quite understand. She looked at Shen Luoan in front of her and said softly, "Is this what a normal woman should have? Why haven't I seen it before?" Although she didn't remember much, she had never heard of such a situation. Recently, Shen Luoan has been a little strange. Could it be that he had planned to make her bleed for a long time? Or perhaps, there was something on her husband's penis that would hurt her. That was why he was acting so strange tonight. Later, he couldn't help but have sex with her. The more Shen Manting thought about it, the more panicked she became. She looked at Shen Luoan in front of her and said sadly, "Honey, you don't have to consider my feelings.
Just tell me directly. Did you hurt me?
Are you afraid that I'll hate you so you lied?" Shen Luoan laughed out loud and helplessly pressed her into his arms. He whispered, "No, what I said is true.
Don't be afraid.
There's nothing to be afraid of." Shen Manting looked at him and mumbled, "Why don't I believe you? It's true."
Shen Luoan pulled her out. "Come here. I'll explain it to you."
When they walked out, the two of them immediately saw the dark red bloodstain on the bedsheet. Shen Luoan looked at the mess and said helplessly, "Come on, give me a hand.
Let's change the bedsheets first."
Shen Manting was very obedient. She responded and whispered, "Okay." Shen Luoan quickly took out the bedsheets and removed the dirty ones. He said, "This is called menstruation for women. If they don't have menstruation, they can't have children."
Oh, I see. Shen Manting nodded but soon asked, why didn't I have it before? Because you're still young. Shen Luoan looked at her. Most women have their first period between the ages of 13 and 15. That's usually the case. When you were 12, I'm afraid you hadn't even had your first period yet. Oh, I see. Shen Manting nodded. Did I experience it when I was sleeping in the hospital? Isn't it disgusting to dirty the bed every day? It won't happen. When you were in the hospital, you didn't have enough food and nutrition. It was difficult for your body to metabolize food, so you didn't have this kind of thing. Shen Luo, and put the dirty bed sheets into the basket. Shen Manting blinked and asked, Honey, I'm on my period now. Will I have a baby? Shen Manting sounded doubtful, and she looked a little puzzled. Shen Luoan paused when he heard this question. Then, he turned around and glanced at Shen Manting. When Shen Manting met his gaze, she looked at him and said, I heard that giving birth is very painful. Honey, can I not have a child? When Shen Luoan heard this, an idea suddenly sprouted in his mind. In the past, no matter how much she hated herself, she couldn't let go of her child. Chapter 21:19. Does that mean she won't leave? Now, before Shen Manting remembered anything, he had already coaxed her to get the marriage certificate. She had been awake for more than half a month, and her body had almost recovered. Now she was on her period. When Shen Manting is pregnant, he won't let her go no matter what. As he thought about it, he looked at her with a pair of burning eyes. He quickly looked away, reached out to change the bedsheets, and said, Sure, but this problem is not something we can control. If you are pregnant, you can't abort it. When Shen Manting heard this, she subconsciously covered her stomach and said softly, If I abort it, the child will die, right? Yes, Shen Luoan replied. He turned his face to look at her seriously and said slowly, No matter what, it is a small life. If a living human life is erased, what is the difference between it and direct murder? Looking at Shen Manting in front of him, Shen Luoan's expression was solemn. When Shen Manting saw Shen Luoan's expression, she was a little frightened and said timidly, Is not wanting to have a child the same as killing? There is no such saying. Shen Luoan put the bed sheets down. It's just that if such a small life is already by your side, not only do you not cherish it, but you would rather choose to abandon it, then isn't that killing? Isn't that right? His logic was impeccable, and Shen Manting was speechless for a moment. She subconsciously stroked her stomach and did not say anything. Just like when you were a child, you were abandoned on the street by your biological parents. If no kind-hearted people sent you to the orphanage at that time, would you be dead now? Then did your biological parents also kill you? Did they also become murderers? But they gave birth to me. Shen Manting couldn't help but refute. We haven't given birth yet, have we? Why not? So you have to raise the child after you are born, Shen Luoan interrupted her. If you are pregnant and don't want to give birth, what is the difference between you and them? Shen Manting was speechless again. So, if you are pregnant, you must give birth. Shen Luoan looked at her with a serious expression. Giving birth isn't as painful as you think. You've already given birth once. Don't be afraid. This time, he would be by her side, accompanying her from start to finish, taking care of her. When Shen Manting saw the look of anticipation on Shen Luoan's face, her unwavering heart suddenly wavered. Facing his threatening gaze, she shrunk her neck and said softly, Then, if I'm pregnant, I'll give birth. If I'm not, I won't give birth. A smile finally appeared on Shen Luoan's face. He smiled and gently pulled her closer to him. He planted a kiss on her forehead and said softly, Okay. When Shen Manting saw the happy expression on Shen Luoan's face, she felt as if she was a lamb in a tiger's den. He couldn't help but retort, If I'm not pregnant, you can't use despicable means to make me pregnant. His little face puffed up, full of warning. Shen Luoan froze, but he didn't say anything. He hugged her and planted a kiss on her lips. Shen Manting vaguely guessed something and felt inexplicably unhappy. Chapter 21:20. She was throwing a tantrum. Shen Luoan looked at her back and didn't care. He turned around and continued to change the bedsheets.
It was always a little difficult to be alone. Shen Manting was sitting by the side playing with the computer. When she saw that Shen Luo and had finished changing all the bedsheets, she slowly came over with the computer and lay down beside him. Shen Manting liked watching movies more and more. Ever since Shen Luo and took her to watch Gone with the Wind. Today, they were watching Inception, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. Shen Luo and glanced at the computer. It was a little late. Aren't you going to sleep? Shen Manting pretended not to hear him and stared at the computer. Shen Luoan smiled and quickly lay down and closed his eyes. However, Shen Manting was watching a movie, so it was impossible for Shen Luo to fall asleep. In his mind, he had already unknowingly conceived a plan for the future. After Shen Manting was pregnant, he would put aside the matter of the laboratory and leave everything to Lao Wu. He only needed to go back occasionally and spend the rest of the time with her. In the past 2 years, Shen Manting had been in a coma, which was enough for him to worry about. Next, he would have a good rest for a year. When Shen Manting gave birth to the child, he would go back to the laboratory. If Shen Manting didn't regain her memory, of course, everything would be fine. If she recovered her memories during this period of time, then she would probably hate him a little less on account of how diligent he was and how serious he was. Moreover, he took good care of Xiao Yuer. Would that be enough to offset Shen Manting's resentment towards him when she grew up? Shen Luoan closed his eyes and lay in bed. His mind was racing. Shen Manting didn't know how much time had passed before she finally covered the laptop and put it aside. Then, she carefully lay down. After lying down, Shen Luoan reached out and hugged her. Shen Manting was obviously shocked, and her whole body trembled. But she quickly reacted and elbowed Shen Luoan. She said coquettishly, "You're so annoying. You're pretending to be asleep when you're not." "I'm not," Shen Luoan smiled. "You just thought I was asleep. When did I tell you that I was asleep?" Shen Manting was a little unhappy and said, "You're twisting words and forcing logic." Shen Luoan hugged her and whispered, "Let's sleep." The heating in the imperial capital had been turned off, and the weather was a little cold. At that moment, Shen Luoan's arms were indescribably warm. Shen Manting leaned over and hugged him tightly. She closed her eyes. She was angry just now, but in fact, she was already very sleepy and soon fell asleep. However, just like in the past, he still had a series of nightmares. She dreamt that she was standing in the middle of a bustling wedding. Luxury cars were coming and going, and the beautiful bride was holding the hand of the handsome groom. Surrounded by the crowd, they walked out step by step. She watched from afar, watching their backs disappear into the luxurious villa, and then slowly retreated. She didn't know why, even though she was just a bystander at this moment, she couldn't help but feel pain in her heart. It was as if this had happened to him before. He slowly retreated, and soon, he was out of everyone's sight. Chapter 21-21. Goodbye, Shen Luoan. Her voice was filled with indescribable indifference and hatred that he had been familiar with for a long time. The low voice was particularly ear-piercing in the night. Shen Luoan was awakened from his sleep and turned his head to look at Shen Manting. Shen Manting was very quiet, as if what he had just heard was just an illusion. He gently hugged Shen Manting beside him, his heart beating heavily. But his heart was getting emptier. Shen Manting seemed to feel Shen Luoan's touch and embrace and consciously leaned into his arms. Shen Luoan held her in his arms and pinched the soft flesh on her waist that had grown in the past half a month. He couldn't help but call out softly, "Manting." His voice was very soft and slightly trembling. Shen Manting seemed to have heard Shen Luoan's voice and seemed to have dreamed of something happy. She snuggled into his arms and smiled with an indescribable emotion. Shen Luoan had been paying attention to her expression, but under such weak light, he couldn't see it clearly. But Shen Manting was indeed smiling. Shen Luoan couldn't help but call out softly again, "Manting." Shen Manting didn't respond this time and just breathed evenly. But Shen Luoan couldn't fall asleep. He didn't know how long he had been awake, but Shen Manting suddenly moved. Shen Luoan clearly felt it and looked down. Soon, Shen Manting moved again and said dreamily, "Shen Luoan, Shen Luoan." Shen Luoan's body suddenly stiffened. Although her voice was soft, the indifference in it was still real, and Shen Luoan could hear it clearly.
This soft call seemed to be just a temporary nightmare. Soon, Shen Manting calmed down. He subconsciously hugged her tightly, and his heart was in a mess. After a long time, Shen Manting sobbed again. "No. I beg you." Shen Luan was on the verge of breaking down. He hugged her tightly in his arms and couldn't hold himself back any longer. His breathing became heavy and he called out softly, "Manting, Manting, wake up! Don't continue. Wake up, wake up!" His voice was choked with sobs, filled with panic and guilt. Shen Luo admitted that he was selfish. He never wanted Shen Manting to regain her memory. From the moment he knew that she was no longer Shen Manting, he had already made up his mind to keep her by his side. Now, she could dream more and more of the past, and she was getting closer and closer to regaining her memory. Absolutely not. Shen Luo's excessive action woke Shen Manting up. When she opened her eyes, her face seemed to be a little wet, especially her eyes. Her vision was obscured by tears. Shen Manting looked at him blankly and called, "Luos." Shen Manting was a little confused. She looked at him and shouted, "Hubby!" Manting was a Shen. Shen Luoan calmed down when he heard the familiar voice. Lowering his eyes, he looked into her clear eyes and couldn't help but hug her tightly. Lowering his head, he gently kissed her lips. His movement was so sudden that Shen Manting didn't have time to react and was swept away by him in an instant. Shen Luoan's movements were a little heavy and urgent. She wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but she actually felt that he was a little nervous. She placed her palm on his back and gently patted him like how he usually comforted her. Chapter 21-22. Feeling Shen Luoan's emotions, Shen Manting suddenly remembered a very impressive sentence in a movie that she had watched recently. People who have no sense of security will feel nervous because they are afraid of losing. For some reason, this sentence automatically came to Shen Manting's mind. Shen Luo noticed Shen Manting's movements, and inexplicably felt more at ease, and his movements unconsciously became much gentler. The kiss didn't last long, and soon Shen Luo let go of Shen Manting. Shen Manting opened her eyes and looked at him and asked softly, "Honey, did you have a nightmare?" Her soft voice was particularly seductive in this night. Her tone was completely different from the indifference and alienation she had when she was sleeping. This Shen Manting was even more pleasing to him. Shen Luoan gently hugged her and whispered, "I dreamed that you were going to leave me, just like 2 or 3 years ago." When Shen Manting heard this, she immediately pushed him away and said, "Honey, how can you curse your own wife like this?" His own wife? Shen Luoan couldn't help but smile, and the anxiety in his heart dissipated in an instant. "Didn't I have a car accident 2 or 3 years ago?" Shen Manting rebuked, "I won't. Don't curse me, or I'll be hit by a car again, and you'll lose your wife again." Shen Luoan smiled, held her in his arms and whispered, "Yes, I won't. But, honey, I also had a nightmare." Shen Manting hooked his shoulder and pouted, "I dreamed that I gave birth to a child, and you weren't by my side. I was alone in the hospital, and I was so scared. Then I stayed in the hospital alone, and I didn't have food to eat. I was so hungry, and then I bought the same food as others, but I couldn't eat because I gave birth to a child." As she spoke, Shen Manting's voice gradually became softer, with a little sadness. "I feel so pitiful, so sad, and my heart hurts, as if it really happened." Shen Manting hugged Shen Luoan tighter, and her heart ached, and she whispered softly, "But these dreams are fake, right? These things didn't happen at all, and they're not real. Honey, you wouldn't treat me like that. You wouldn't even come to see me after I gave birth, would you?" Shen Luoan's heart was empty for a moment, and it was terrible. Yes, it was very possible that all of these things had happened. At that time, Shen Manting gave birth, and he was 2 days late. When she gave birth, it was the time when she needed the child's father the most, but he wasn't there. The day after she gave birth was when a woman was at her weakest, and he wasn't there. It was only on the 3rd day that he finally arrived. He had let her down. Shen Luoan was silent for a while before he said, "I told you it was a dream. It's impossible not to feel anything. But a dream is a dream." He caressed her long hair and said softly, "Don't take it seriously." Shen Manting hugged him and felt a little more at ease. She rubbed herself against his chest and said coquettishly, "Hubby, my stomach hurts. It's bloated and painful. Help me rub it." She reached out and pulled his palm to touch her lower abdomen. Shin Luo'an's warm palms caressed her lower abdomen, massaging it gently. Chapter 21-23. She didn't know how many times she had woken up from her sleep. Shen Manting looked at the ceiling blankly. She subconsciously reached out to touch her side, but it was already empty, with only a little residual warmth. She got up and was surrounded by a dazzling light. At the same time, the door of the bathroom was opened. Shen Manting looked over and saw Shin Luo'an, dressed neatly, coming out from inside. When he saw her, Shin Luo'an stepped forward. Shen Manting shrank back as if she was facing a formidable enemy. She seemed to be at a loss and exclaimed, "Shin Luo'an." Shen Luo'an stopped moving forward, and his back stiffened. Looking at Shen Manting in front of him in disbelief, Shin Luo'an suddenly panicked. But soon, Shen Manting's face became a little blank. Looking at Shen Luo'an, she frowned and said, "Honey." Shen Manting's voice was filled with confusion. She looked up at Shen Luo'an, who was standing still, and put her palm on her chest. Shen Luo'an felt as if his heart was being squeezed. He looked at Shen Manting in front of him and walked over step by step. Shen Manting looked at him, and her eyes trembled, but she resisted. She shrank back, lay down again, and covered herself with the quilt. Shen Luo'an stopped moving and stood still, pursing his lips. No one made a sound, and the room was very quiet. After a long time, Shen Luo'an said, "Are you not feeling well?" Shen Manting didn't say anything and covered herself with the quilt with her back to him. Shen Luo'an walked over and said, "Girls are more uncomfortable these days, but it will be over in a few days. Do you want to get up and change the cushion? It's not good for your health if you use it for a long time." Shen Manting's eyes were tightly shut, and she subconsciously clamped her legs together. Her butt was a little wet, and it felt like it was dirty again. Feeling a little embarrassed, Shen Manting whispered with her back to him, "Honey, help me find one. I'll change it myself." Shen Luo'an's heart calmed down, and his originally tense mood and expression completely relaxed at this moment. He was in a good mood and replied, "Okay." Shen Luo'an went to the cabinet and took out a tablet that Mrs. Shan had prepared some time ago and handed it to her. Shen Manting's head popped out from under the quilt, and her cheeks were red. He reached out his hand to pull it back, but quickly retracted it and said, "You can go. I'll get up by myself." It was very likely that his pants would be dirted. It was too embarrassing. Shen Manting shyly covered herself with the blanket, not daring to show her face. Suddenly, she heard Shin Luo'an's chuckle. Then, the sound of his footsteps gradually faded away. He didn't get up until he heard the door open and close. Shen Manting blushed. She pinched the thing in her hand and lifted the quilt. On the dark bed sheet, there was an even darker mark that was very eye-catching. As expected, Shen Manting held a piece of pink bread in her hand and slowly made her way to the bathroom. Only then did he realize that his pants were all dirty. Crestfallen, he returned to the cloakroom to search for clean clothes. When he opened the drawer, he saw the 2 red booklets that had been quietly placed there not long ago. The 3 golden words were especially eye-catching. She didn't know why, but when she saw those 3 words, she felt very uncomfortable. When he opened it, the photo of the 2 of them was especially eye-catching. His breathing became short, and his head felt as if it had been hit by a sharp object. Shen Manting's vision darkened, and her legs gave way. She fell to the ground. Chapter 21-24. The whole world was shaking, and everything familiar around her seemed to be far away. It was so familiar that it was no longer familiar. She fell limply, unable to muster up any strength. Shen Luo'an closed the door behind him, but he didn't leave. He leaned against the door, panicking for no reason. A voice in his heart strongly reminded him that she was about to wake up. He had this feeling before, but it had never been as strong as it was now. His heart was beating strongly, quickly, with panic and guilt. Shen Luo'an hesitated for a moment, then opened the door again. However, he heard heavy breathing coming from the cloakroom. His heart skipped a beat, and he strode forward. Shen Manting was lying on the ground, her eyes half closed, and she looked over with difficulty. Her eyes were filled with all kinds of emotions. For Shen Luo'an, Each of them carried a heavy and fatal destructive force. Subconsciously holding his breath, Shen Luo and felt that something was quickly withdrawing from him. Shen Manting looked at him and seemed to twitch her lips. At the same time, a drop of water fell from the corner of her eye. The next moment, Shen Manting weakly lowered her head and closed her eyes. Manting! Shen Luo and felt terribly empty, and he picked her up. At this moment, Shen Manting's face was pale, and she leaned against him weakly. She had already lost consciousness. Shen Luoan looked at her, and his heart trembled. He panicked and lost. The smell of disinfectant was very unpleasant. Shen Manting opened her eyes, and there was a burst of pain in her lower abdomen. She stared at the white ceiling above her head, and after a long time, she looked away. She sat up, and it was quiet all around. The lights in the ward were not on, and the windows were open. The wind was a little strong, and the curtains were rolled up high, fluttering. At the same time, there was a faint smell of tobacco. Shen Manting looked sideways, and saw a figure standing by the window, both elbows leaning on the windowsill, holding a cigarette between his fingers. It's him. Shen Manting smiled silently, and raised her hand to touch the top of her left fifth rib. Here, his heart was beating faster and faster. This was the feeling of being alive. She was still alive. Still alive, Shen Luo and put out the cigarette, turned around, and looked at her. At this moment, Shen Manting's eyes were clear and her mind was clear. A pair of eyes looked at him indifferently and calmly. The corners of her pale lips curled up slightly. She seemed to be mocking him, but at the same time, it also seemed to be a greeting between old friends. She said, Shen Luoan. Shen Luo and felt a lump in his throat, and an indescribable sense of suffocation welled up from the bottom of his heart. His body tensed up, and he slowly walked forward. Shen Manting looked at him. She was surprisingly calm. She watched helplessly as Shen Luo and walked up to her and smiled. His smile was filled with a gentleness she had never seen before. It was as if he was facing another person. Or perhaps, he was facing another Shen Manting. You're awake. Shen Luoan's voice was soft and gentle. He reached out and was about to touch her forehead. Shen Manting narrowed her eyes and raised her hand to slap him away. Shen Luoan paused for a moment, then calmly retracted his hand. The smile on his face didn't change. He walked to the bedside table and said, Mom just stewed some soup. It took a long time. Drink it quickly and you'll be discharged. Your son is waiting for Mom and Dad to come home. However, Shen Manting looked at him expressionlessly. Looking at the gentle smile on his face, she felt extremely sarcastic in her heart. The corner of Shen Manting's mouth twitched coldly, and she said slowly, Is it interesting? Chapter 21-25. The thermos rolled on the ground twice, but it was safe and sound. However, Shen Luo remained motionless, as if he had been struck by lightning. With his back facing her, an indescribable bitterness welled up in him. It broke through his throat, broke through his shackles, and overflowed into his eyes. In the end, it had come. What he feared and worried about still couldn't escape. Shen Manting looked at his back coldly and asked, How long was I lying there? Shen Luo suppressed his surging emotions and kept his back facing her. He bent down to pick up the thermos and wiped it with 2 tissues before saying, A day, about 12 hours. Shen Manting was stunned and sneered. Do you think I'm an idiot? If it's 12 hours, it should be dawn by now. Moreover, I was hit by a car. But there was no pain on her body. It was strange. She clearly felt that she was in so much pain that she was about to die. The sound of bones breaking seemed to still be ringing in her body. But now her limbs were fine, and she didn't feel any pain at all. Except for her stomach. There was a familiar pain in her lower abdomen. It must be her period. When the car accident happened, she had just finished her period, and it happened in the middle of the night. If it had been 12 hours, it should be past 10 o'clock in the morning. Without a doubt, Shen Luoan was lying to her. He had put in a lot of effort to escape the blame for the car accident. He had to make soup and smile. It was hard on him. Shen Manting only felt sarcastic, but she didn't realize that Shen Luoan was once again frozen in place. With his back facing her, Shen Luoan had a crazy thought. She seemed to have forgotten everything that had happened during this period of time, including marrying him, and Those days and nights of indulgence. Wait, I'll ask Gilia to come. Shen Luoan put the thermos back on the bedside table and walked out without looking back. After closing the door, Shen Luoan called Shen Gilia with trembling hands. The call was quickly connected, and Shen Gilia's voice came through. Brother. Gilia, Manting is awake, but... Shen Gilia looked at Shen Manting in front of him and asked again, do you remember the date of the car accident? I don't remember. How long do you think you slept? Not long, it feels like less than a day. Yeah. Shen Gilia nodded. Do you still remember me? What do you think? She asked. Shen Gilia chuckled and opened his arms to her. Sister Manting. Welcome back. Shen Manting was a little dazed as he hugged her. But it was only for a moment before Shen Gilia let go. Brother, come out for a moment. Shen Luoan already knew. Shen Manting couldn't remember returning to the time when she was 12 years old. She couldn't remember anything that had happened since she first woke up this morning. From the looks of it, it's selective amnesia, Shen Gilia said slowly. It's actually quite normal for such a situation to occur. Gilia. Shen Luoan's voice was a little hoarse. She still hates me, just like before. Shen Gilia was silent. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He patted him on the shoulder and said, take it slow. You can't rush things. Shen Luoan remained silent. Shen Gilia looked at him for a long time before whispering, I think you should be glad that she can't remember. Chapter 21-26. Shen Luoan fell silent again. Shen Gilia felt sympathy for him. He patted him on the shoulder and said, Sister Manting just said that she wants to be discharged. Yes. The entire journey back home was silent. Shen Manting went straight to her nanny's room. The nanny's room was very, very small. After 2 years of accumulation, it had become a storeroom. At this moment, it was filled with things. The things that he had used in the past, old and new, were all gone. Her phone was nowhere to be found. Shen Manting was silent for a long time before she sighed heavily. Before the accident, she had been sleeping in his room. It didn't seem to matter if he slept with her again. However, time seemed to pass for a very, very long time. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for them to pile up to this extent in just one day. How long had she slept? Do you need this thing? Shen Luoan asked, startling Shen Manting. Shen Luoan turned around and saw a pack of sanitary napkins in his hand. Shen Manting glanced at it and grabbed it, saying, Of course I need it. All right. Come to my room and sleep. Shen Luoan turned around and said, There are too many things here. It'll take some time to tidy them up. Shen Manting remained silent and stood with her back to him. Shen Luoan sighed and said, I'll sleep on the sofa. Come over. With that, Shen Luoan's footsteps faded away. Shen Manting turned her head and saw his back. The lights in the corridor cast a long shadow on his body. Shen Manting felt a little complicated. She held the bag in her hand, turned around, and walked into the room. He would not wrong himself. Shen Manting went to the cloakroom and found many well-fitting clothes. However, his style seemed to be much cuter than hers. They were all pink, red, green, and blue. They were all cute pink colors. He found a set of pink bunny pajamas and took a bath before falling asleep. Shen Luoan sat in the living room and smoked. Shen Luoan seemed to have expected all of this, so when it came, he didn't seem to feel anything other than heaviness. She was still the same. Just like 2 years ago. 2 years ago, she wouldn't have left. 2 years later, would she still not leave? So be it. That was pretty good too. As long as she was still around. That was what he was thinking, but the smoke drifted up and into his eyes, stinging his eyes. Chuckling softly, he extinguished the cigarette. However, it was so uncomfortable that it was almost suffocating. He lay down and covered himself with a thin blanket. He closed his eyes, but his consciousness was clear. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly heard a cry. The sound of a woman crying. Shen Luoan opened his eyes abruptly. Before he could react, he heard the sound of the door opening and the crying suddenly became louder. He sat up and looked into the distance. It was Shen Manting. When Shen Manting saw him,
She sniffed hard and rushed over to him shouting, "Hubby!" Shen Luoan was stunned. Before he could react, he was hugged by her soft body. Shen Manting cried loudly and hugged his neck tightly. She sobbed and shouted, "Honey, I just had a nightmare. I was scared to death." Sob. Shen Luoan couldn't react at all. He subconsciously raised his hands to hug her, but he didn't dare to raise them. For a moment, they were frozen in mid-air. The commotion outside had also awakened the others. Shen Jilia came out of the room and turned on the lights. Shen Luoan subconsciously narrowed his eyes and looked over.
Chapter 21-27.
Shen Manting also looked over and saw that it was Shen Jilia. She wiped her eyes and wanted to stop. However, she still couldn't control herself and burst into tears. "Jilia!" Shen Jilia looked at Shen Manting and then at Shen Luoan. He saw that Shen Luoan was also at a loss. Shen Luoan turned around and patted her back gently. He said slowly, "Good girl, don't cry." Shen Manting's crying stopped a little. She sat in Shen Luoan's arms and sobbed, "Hubby, sob." Shen Luoan looked at her in silence. He looked at her and found that at this moment, her eyes were clear and clouded with a layer of mist. She was looking at him with a wronged expression. She was like a child who got up in the middle of the night and couldn't find her parents. She was at a loss and helpless. Shen Jilia saw it clearly and called out, "Sister-in-law." Shen Manting looked over and wiped her eyes while sobbing.
Shen Luoan gave her a tissue.
His emotions were very complicated. Shen Manting took it and wiped her tears and blew her nose. She said pitifully, "Did I wake you up?"
"Go to sleep. I just had a nightmare."
"Okay," Shen Jilia replied, but he didn't leave. Instead, he stepped forward and asked, "What did you dream about?" Shen Jilia wasn't the only one who was curious about this question. Even Shen Luoan turned his head away. Shen Manting sobbed and said, "I dreamed that I chased my husband away." As she spoke, she trembled as she cried, and her tears once again poured down. "But my heart, it hurts so much. I don't want to drive my husband away, but I can't control myself. I feel so sad." His voice was intermittent, and he sounded like he was about to cry. Shen Luoan was silent and gently patted her back. She looked up at Shen Jilia and found that his face was solemn. "What's wrong?" Yi Qianqian's voice came over. Yi Qianqian walked over in her nightgown. When she saw Shen Manting sobbing, she touched Shen Jilia and asked, "Did you quarrel?"
"It's okay."
Shen Jilia squeezed Yi Qianqian's hand and looked at Shen Luoan. He said meaningfully, "Brother, take sister-in-law in first." "Yes," Shen Luoan replied. He got up and gently pulled her along. "Let's go in first." Shen Manting was sobbing obediently. As soon as she entered the room, she hugged his neck tightly and whispered, "Hubby, do you love me?" Shen Luoan was about to be pulled up. He pulled her into his embrace and sighed softly, "Love, of course I love you."
"Then can you promise me one thing?"
Shen Manting looked up at him with an aggrieved expression. "If I chase you away in the future, it will definitely be fake. I don't want to chase you away. If I'm not dreaming, I'll really chase you away. Don't go. I don't want you to go. Don't go." Shen Luoan's heart softened. He couldn't help but lower his head and kiss her. His palm brushed through her hair and he whispered, "What if you're serious about chasing me away?" "That's impossible," Shen Manting said with a serious expression. "That's not me."
"Hubby, don't go."
"What if I take it seriously?" Shen Luoan's voice was as light as a feather and ethereal. Shen Manting choked on her words and stared at him blankly. After a long time she said, "Then, when I wake up from my dream, I'll go after you." Yi Qianqian felt that something was wrong. Why was Shen Manting crying in the living room all of a sudden? She nudged Shen Jilia and said, "Old Shen, Big Brother's temper is terrible.
Did he get angry at Manting?" Chapter 21-28.
Yi Qianqian felt that everything was strange. She suddenly remembered and said, "By the way, hubby, didn't you tell me that Manting regained her memory? Why is she?" "Shoo!" Shen Jilia put his finger to his lips and sat down on the bed. He frowned and thought for a while before saying, "Well, I'm afraid it's a little troublesome." Shen Luo and coaxed Shen Manting to sleep before he walked out. He reached out and knocked on Shen Jilia's door twice. Then, he walked straight to the sofa and sat down. Shen Jilia walked out and saw Shen Luo and solemn expression. He asked, "Was Sister Manting asleep just now?" Then she suddenly woke up and became the 12-year-old Manting again? Shen Luoan took out a cigarette, lit it, and responded calmly. "Yes, it's a split personality." Shen Jilia finished his diagnosis and said it word by word. Every word made Shen Luoan feel very complicated. He looked at Shen Jilia and asked, "What do you mean?" To put it simply, it's very likely that sister-in-law doesn't want to remember the past, but there's another consciousness in her subconscious that is trying to awaken this memory. Shen Jilia slowly analyzed. Sister Manting wants to wake up, but sister-in-law doesn't want to. There's a difference between the two, and from one person to two people. But now, Shen Jilia's words made it clear that he treated Shen Manting as a completely different person. Shen Luoan was silent. He smoked silently and his mind was in a mess. Is this a split personality? Yi Qianqian leaned over with a look of disbelief on her face. I've only seen it in novels and comics. How could Manting hit someone? Shen Jilia said. So far, neither Sister Manting nor sister-in-law are aggressive. Yes, I think so too. Yi Qianqian sat beside Shen Luoan and felt a little sorry for him. She asked, "Brother, is sister-in-law asleep now?" Yes. Shen Luoan had a headache and reached out to rub his temples. What should I do? He couldn't stand Shen Manting like this. He couldn't tell when it was her and when it was her. He had no idea. Do you want sister-in-law to wake up or Sister Manting to wake up? Shen Jilia asked slowly. Shen Luoan smoked his cigarette and looked up at Shen Jilia. Shen Jilia's expression was indescribably solemn. Shen Luoan didn't know what he was feeling at that moment. He let out a long puff of smoke and laughed. I don't know. He really didn't know. Both Shen Manting and Shen Manting were Shen Manting. Only when the two of them existed together could Shen Manting be the real Shen Manting. This situation was completely out of his expectations. He felt lucky and sorrowful at the same time. Of the two personalities, one is the primary personality, which dominates most of the body's consciousness and actions. The secondary personality is in a passive state, Shen Jilia said slowly. From what I heard from sister-in-law, when Sister Manting is active, she may not be sure if she's dreaming or really moving, but it's very likely that she's aware of it. Then, when she's on the move, does Manting also sense it? Yi Qianqian asked. Both Manting and the two men understood who she was referring to. Chapter 21-29. When Shen Manting woke up, she was surrounded by light. She got up and went to the bathroom. At a glance, she saw the toiletries by the sink. They were very familiar. There was a pink toothbrush, a pink cup, and a cute strawberry-flavored toothpaste. It was so childish. Shen Manting picked them up naturally and brushed her teeth. After washing her face carefully, she naturally went to the cloakroom and found a dress to change into. She walked to the door in a good mood. When she reached out to open the door, she suddenly stopped. All of this seemed so familiar that she didn't need anyone's guidance. Shen Manting froze and stopped moving. She turned her head and looked at the huge suite behind her. The suite was very large. In this villa, besides Shen Longyue's room, Shen Luoan's room was the largest. It was so spacious that it was dazzling. Every decoration and every piece of furniture was familiar to her. It was obviously completely different from before the car accident. Shen Luoan was more solemn and had a cold temper. He liked cool colors. But there were a lot of pink and green things in this room. Were they the children's? No, it shouldn't be. In addition to the toys, there were decorations on the wall, photos. Yes, the photo wall. Shen Manting looked over and saw the wall full of photo frames. She hadn't noticed before. These things were very natural. It was as if they had always been there. And Shen Manting remembered that Shen Luoan never liked to do these things. Shen Manting walked over and was slightly taken aback. Everything was too familiar. Pictures after pictures. Faces after faces. There was him and her. In one of them, she and Shen Luoan were holding a fair and tender child who looked 1 or 2 years old, smiling brightly. And Shen Luo and was looking at her with a smile, his eyes deep and gentle. Shen Manting felt that something was wrong. The woman in the photo was too thin. Thinner than she was at her thinnest. Was it her? The child they were holding. The features were very similar to Shen Luo An's. Was it her son? Shen Manting suddenly became enlightened. She looked at the child in the photo and suddenly seemed to understand. The child was her and Shen Luo An's child. Before the car accident, the child was only a few months old, but now looking at the photo, he was at least 1 or 2 years old. She really slept for a long time. At least a year. But when he looked at himself in the photo, he had a heavy feeling of doubt. She had just woken up. Why was she taking photos with Shen Luoan? She stood beside Shen Luo and with the baby in her arms and a bright smile on her face. It was as if she was truly happy. She stood beside Shen Luoan without any ill feelings. His demeanor made Shen Manting a little uncomfortable. This wasn't her. It couldn't be her. However, she knew better than anyone that this was her. This was Shen Manting. Even the small mole under the earlobe was exactly the same. This was something that no substitute could replicate. But, how could that be possible? Shen Manting subconsciously took a step back in disbelief. Knock. Knock. There was a careful knock on the door. Shen Manting turned her head, and soon, she saw that the door had been opened. Shen Luoan walked in, looking exhausted. He was still wearing yesterday's clothes. When he saw Shen Manting's dazed expression, he knew who she was. Chapter 21:30. It was already past 10 o'clock, and most of his family members had already left for work. Nanny he was playing outside with Little Moon while Yi Qianqian was sitting on the sofa outside, ready to rush over if anything happened. The two people in the room sat facing each other, and neither of them spoke first. Shen Manting flipped her hair. She wasn't in a hurry. She drank the soy milk in front of her and nibbled on the bread, waiting for him to speak first. However, even after she had finished her breakfast, she did not hear the man in front of her utter a single word. She couldn't take it anymore. She looked at him and frowned. "Weren't you the one who wanted to talk to me?" "Yes," Shen Luoan replied. "Manting, you haven't seen your son since you woke up, have you?" As she spoke, she stood up. "I'll bring my son in." Shen Manting was baffled. She frowned and shouted, "Shen Luoan, what the hell are you doing?" Shen Luoan quickly opened the door and walked out. When Yi Qianqian heard the commotion, she immediately craned her neck to take a look. Shen Luoan ignored her and quickly walked over to his son. He said, "Baby, do you miss your mother?" Little Moon was playing with his building blocks. When he heard this, he immediately stood up and nodded. "Yes." Shen Luoan picked up the baby and quickly returned to the room. The moment he stepped into the room, Yi Qianqian looked at him again. He closed the door and quickly turned around with his son in his arms. "Mom!" Little Moon shouted happily. He opened his arms and gestured in Shen Manting's direction. "Little Moon missed you." Shen Manting stared blankly at the child in front of her. She still couldn't wrap her head around what was happening. This was her son. Shen Luoan walked over with Shen Yuexiao in his arms and handed the baby to her. Shen Manting hugged him in a daze, and the little boy immediately took the initiative to hug her. He kissed her on the lips and said, "Mommy, kiss me." Although the little guy said that, his body was not honest at all. He wriggled around in Shen Manting's arms. Finally, he wrapped his arms around her neck and stood on her lap. Throughout the entire process, Shen Manting didn't have any reaction other than supporting herself with her hands. Looking at Shen Yuexiao's familiar face, she didn't feel anything strange in her heart. But at the same time, it was filled with a sense of wonder. It shouldn't be like this, but it should be like this. A very strange feeling. Shen Manting lowered her head and hugged Shen Yuexiao in her arms. "Little Moon," she called. "Mom." Little Moon was very excited to hear Shen Manting call his name. "Ride the wooden horse." "Do you want to ride a wooden horse?" Shen Manting chuckled. "How about I take you there?" "Great." Little Moon looked very excited. "Put on your shoes." "All right, I'll take you there." Shen Manting stood up and walked out with the baby in her arms. Without any guidance or warning, she actually entered the baby's nursery. Yi Qianqian stood outside and watched Shen Manting walk in. She subconsciously stood up and followed her. When Shen Manting saw Yi Qianqian, she was a little surprised and asked, "Qianqian, aren't you going to work?" When Yi Qianqian heard that, she chuckled and looked a little embarrassed. "I stopped working a long time ago. What do you want?" "Help little Moon put on his shoes. Let's go to the amusement park later. The baby wants to go." Shen Manting put Shen Yueshao down and found his shoes. Chapter 21:31. However, it turned out that schizophrenia was no different from an ordinary person. After Shen Manting helped Shen Yueshao put on his shoes, she stood up and looked at Yi Qianqian. "Do you want to go with me? Let's go together." "Aunt, let's ride the wooden horse." Shen Yueshao looked at Yi Qianqian and extended his hand with the most sincere smile. "Let's play together." Yi Qianqian looked at him and asked cautiously, "Big brother, are you not going?" Sure enough, as soon as she said that, she found that Shen Manting's expression did not look good. He coughed lightly and said, "I just think that if we go out to play, it'll be more fun for a family of 3, right? Besides, sister-in-law, your health hasn't recovered yet. It's more appropriate for a man to take care of you." "Forget it." Shen Manting did not give her any face at all. "Shen Luo, and has to go to the laboratory now. He's very busy." "Ah." Yi Qianqian felt that she had said the wrong thing. It seemed that Shen Manting's hatred for Shen Luo and was not light at all. She thought about it and said, "I want to go. I'm bored to death at home. Wait for me. I'll go change my clothes." "Okay," Shen Manting replied. Yi Qianqian felt uncomfortable all over. She was used to the enthusiasm and vivacity of the 12-year-old Shen Manting. Now that the real Shen Manting was here, she felt that she was cold everywhere. It was as if the whole family owed her 5 million yuan. Bah, she did not owe them. Yi Qianqian quickly changed into a new set of clothes and happily rolled out. She glanced at her and said, "Sister-in-law, you didn't bring your bag? The bag we bought together a few days ago looks good on you." "Which one?" Shen Manting asked subconsciously. Yi Qianqian noticed that she called her sister-in-law, but she did not seem to notice. She answered every time she called her sister-in-law, and her answers were very smooth. Her heart was slightly moved, but she did not show it on her face. She said, "The pink one with a lump of hair hanging on it." "The pink one with hair hanging on it?" The image of the bag immediately appeared in Shen Manting's mind. She subconsciously said, "Is it the one that looks like a camera?" "Yes, yes." Yi Qianqian nodded. "Take it and go. We might have to queue up for a long time." However, Shen Manting remained silent. He looked at Yi Qianqian and frowned. Yi Qianqian froze, but she didn't let it show on her face. She asked, "What's wrong? What happened to me yesterday?" "Ah." Yi Qianqian didn't know how to respond to the sudden question. She thought about it for a moment before answering. "He probably fainted." "Why did you suddenly faint?" "Maybe Aunt Flo came and she wasn't feeling well, so she fainted." "It's not like I've never had my period before." Shen Manting looked straight at her. "Moreover, my memory only stops at the time of the car accident. When I woke up, I was alive and kicking. You don't seem to find it strange." "Oh." Yi Qianqian's expression was calm. "I know. You lost your memory. Our Gilia is a psychiatrist. What's so strange about this?" The strangest thing about her was actually her essence. After Yi Qianqian labeled Shen Manting as a psycho in her heart, she could no longer look her in the eye. However, she could not say it. Shen Manting frowned. "You know that I lost my memory. Do you think I'm the same as before yesterday?" Chapter 21:32. Haha, of course it's different. I've already said that you're split. How can it be the same? However, what she was thinking in her heart was not what she said. Facing Shen Manting's strange gaze, Yi Qianqian calmly said, "It's the same. What's the difference? You're still you." Shen Manting was speechless. But why did she feel that something was wrong? She put the baby down and said, "I'll go look for the baby." "Okay." Yi Qianqian was finally free. She quickly took the baby and let out a long sigh. Shan Manting walked into the room. Shen Luo and was still sitting in his original position with a pack of cigarettes in front of him. When he saw her come in, he subconsciously covered the cigarette between his fingers and looked at her. Shen Manting's first reaction was to say, "Why are you smoking again?" Such a subconscious reaction popped up like a conditioned reflex. But she held it back. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Shen Luoan saw her expression and reached out to snuff out the cigarette. He said, "I'm not smoking anymore." Shen Manting frowned and felt a little panicked. This kind of panic came inexplicably. She walked into the cloakroom with ease, but her heart was beating faster and faster. In the cloakroom, there was a special compartment for storing bags. There were all kinds of leather bags in it. Pink, green, pink, blue, black and white. A lot. A lot. It was said that it could cure all kinds of diseases. Her bag could cure more diseases than 100 diseases. It was too shocking. They were all hers. Thump, thump. Her heart was beating fast. Shen Manting reached out and grabbed the pink camera bag. She opened it and saw all the IDs in it. Everything that should be there was there. There was also a beautiful and delicate purse that looked like a notepad. When she opened it, there was a stack of cash. It was not much, only about 1,000 yuan. But there were several cards lined up inside. There were gold, blue, and green cards. There were 2 savings cards and a credit card. On the back of the card, the owner's name was written in 3 big characters. Shen Luo N. Shen Manting even felt like she was dreaming when she put everything away. When did she get along with Shen Luo, and so well and harmoniously? 2/3 of the cloakroom was filled with her clothes and a large variety of bags. On the dressing table, luxurious skincare products were placed, as well as all kinds of expensive and luxurious jewelry. His head was throbbing. The sudden awakening and everything she had was completely different from her previous life and everything she had imagined. Shen Manting crouched down with her arms around her head and groaned in pain. When Shen Luo heard the faint sound, he immediately stood up and walked in. When he saw Shen Manting squatting on the ground, he vaguely guessed what had happened. He stepped forward and stood by her side, asking softly, "Are you not feeling well?" Uncomfortable. It was indeed uncomfortable. She looked up and saw Shen Luoan. He was very tall and stood against the light. Under the heavy shadows, she could clearly see the complex expression on his face. Shen Manting frowned. She didn't know where the anger came from, but it was stuck in her chest. She opened her mouth and said, "Did you do a lot of bad things when I was unconscious?" Shen Luoan was taken aback by the sudden question. Chapter 21:33. Obviously, she couldn't. Shen Manting wouldn't accept it. She couldn't accept it. Staring at Shen Luoan above her head, Shen Manting wanted to get angry, but she couldn't. It was as if there was another consciousness in her heart that was preventing her from getting angry with him. This feeling came suddenly and inexplicably, and Shen Manting felt suffocated. She stood up, but her head still hurt. Shen Luoan saw her look and stepped closer. He didn't show any emotion on his face and said softly, "I can't make it up." Shen Manting looked up at him with anger in her eyes. Unexpectedly, Shen Luoan took a step forward and stood in front of her. "But I still have to make it up." Shen Luoan looked at her and said, "I'm trying my best, whether I can make it up or not." Shen Manting looked at Shen Luoan in front of her and felt familiar yet strange. Was Shen Luoan like this? That's not it. Shen Luoan wasn't like this. Besides, Shen Luoan said again and stared deeply into Shen Manting's eyes with a pair of amber eyes, "I'm not just giving you material things." Shen Manting was forced to take a step back under his gaze. Shen Luoan took another step forward and said slowly, "I'm also giving you my heart." Shen Manting felt uncomfortable all over and took another step back. Unexpectedly, Shen Luoan reached out and held her hand. Shen Manting was shocked. Before she could react, Shen Luoan held her hand and pressed it to his heart. "Here, it's beating for you." It was obviously a normal body temperature, a normal warmth. Shen Manting felt inexplicably scorching. Shen Manting immediately withdrew her hand. She pretended to be frightened and shouted, "Shen Luoan, are you crazy?" His words made her so disgusted that she had goosebumps all over her body. How could such words come out of Shen Luoan's mouth?
Yes, I'm crazy, Shen Luoan said calmly. Shen Luoan replied calmly, I almost went crazy when you got into that car accident 2 years ago. 2 years ago. Shen Manting was in a trance when she heard this. I've always regretted it, Shen Luoan said as he held her hand. If I had reflected on myself and not pushed you so hard, or if my temper had been a little better, would things have turned out differently? Shen Manting shuddered and said, You. I've been waiting for you to wake up for the past 2 years, Shen Luoan interrupted her. You were bedridden for 2 years. You were in a vegetative state for 2 years. Do you know that? Shen Manting widened her eyes and looked at Shen Luo, and in disbelief. She was in a vegetative state for 2 years? How could she possibly know? I'm really afraid that you'll never wake up. Shen Luoan took another step forward and forced her into a corner. Little Moon is still so young. He needs his mother. Shen Manting didn't know what to say. She stared blankly at Shen Luoan. There was a faint smell of tobacco on his body, but it wasn't unpleasant. It seemed that he was used to it, so he didn't feel any disgust. On the contrary, she felt that his scent made her feel very safe. Shen Manting looked away, and her heart wavered for a moment. He wore a simple shirt and stood straight. He looked thin and gentle. However, there was an unconcealable tiredness in his eyes and a strong sense of affection. Chapter 21:34. Shen Luo uncovered her face with his palm. His eyes were gentle, and he seemed to be different from the manic and immoral man in her memory. Shen Manting shrank back and reached out to grab his hand that was caressing her cheek. Shen Luoan took the opportunity to hold her hand and said softly, Believe me, every word I'm saying now is true. His words were full of sincerity. Shen Manting found them familiar. It was as if Shen Luoan had said them before she knew it. Every word automatically overlapped in her mind. There was a shadow in her mind that overlapped with Shen Luo, and in front of her. Shen Luoan's affectionate look made Shen Manting's mind a mess. Shen Manting's head hurt even more. She frowned and lowered her head. Shen Luoan, my head hurts. Shen Luoan's eyes flashed and he said, Go lie down for a while. As he spoke, he picked her up without hesitation. Shen Manting screamed and immediately hugged Shen Luoan's neck. She steadied herself and looked sideways at Shen Luoan's handsome face. She closed her eyes and felt dizzy. Shen Manting was placed on the bed and soon closed her eyes. Shen Luoan sat beside her in silence. His heart felt like it had been knocked over. It was very complicated. I know you have always hated me. Shen Luoan's back was facing her. He put his elbows on his legs and covered his face. His voice was a little muffled. He said, But 2 or 3 years have passed. Manting, we still have to live our lives. I want to make it up to you. Can you give me a chance? Give him a chance and give her a chance too. After Shen Luoan's voice fell, there was a long silence in the room. After more than 10 seconds, there was a faint sob behind him. Shen Luoan froze slightly and turned to look. Shen Manting grabbed the quilt and her eyes were full of tears. She looked at Shen Luoan with a pitiful face and pouted. Honey. Shen Luoan's head was throbbing. Shen Manting rushed to Shen Luoan and said, Honey, who were you talking to just now? Shen Luoan pulled her into his arms and whispered, With you. No, you're not talking to me. Shen Manting whimpered, You never talk to me like that. You're talking to someone else, aren't you? Little Shen Manting's mental age was only 12 years old. But as an orphan, she was more sensitive than most adults in certain aspects. Shen Luoan held her in his arms. His heart ached when he heard her words. He hugged her gently and lowered his head to kiss away the tears at the corner of her eyes. He whispered, Manting, I'm talking to my Manting. Hubby. Shen Manting hugged him and buried her face in his chest. There's another Manting, isn't there? Shen Luoan was stunned and didn't know how to answer. Hubby, that Manting isn't me. I'm Manting. Don't like that Manting, okay? Shen Manting hugged him and looked at him pleadingly. That Manting wants to hate you. She doesn't want to be with you. She said that you're a bad person. I told her that you're not, but she didn't believe me. Shen Luoan fell silent.
Chapter 21:35. Shen Manting's eyes were fixed on Shen Luo, and as she spoke, she felt wronged when she saw that he was getting quieter and quieter. She couldn't help but hold Shen Luo tighter and burst into tears. Why aren't you talking? Do you like Shen Manting more and don't want me anymore? Shen Manting hugged him with all her strength and cried uncontrollably. Honey, honey, I'm the one who likes you, not that person. Don't like her, okay? Shen Luoan's heart ached when he heard her crying. Her uneasiness and fear were clear to him. Shen Luoan hesitated for a moment and hugged her tightly in his arms. He said softly, Don't be silly. I love Manting and I always have. Don't cry or you won't look good. No. Shen Manting was very persistent. She hugged him and shouted, You know it's not me. I'm not her and she's not me. I know. She hates you and you also know that she hates you. Why can't you? Only like me. Her voice was intermittent with a sobbing tone. Every word was poking at Shen Luoan's heart. Yes, Shen Manting hated him. Even little Manting knew that. Why was he still so persistent? Perhaps it was because to him, whether it was the original Shen Manting or the 12-year-old He Yunsuan, they were the same person. Shen Manting cried even harder when she saw that Shen Luo and did not speak again. She looked up at the man in front of her, and her little face was already red from crying. She looked at the man in front of her and pulled out her hand to hold his face. Shen Manting directly kissed his lips and clumsily and hurriedly kissed him. Shen Luoan did not refuse, nor did he respond. He looked at her calmly, and his heart was a little complicated. Shen Manting burst into tears and said, She hates it when I do this to you. She doesn't want me to do this. Then she put her hands around his neck and said, But I like it so much. I like it when you kiss me. Can you kiss me again and hug me again? Shen Luoan heard her words and pursed his lips. Shen Manting's body trembled and she sniffed and pretended to cry again. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Looking at him like a child, she said, Hubby, why aren't you talking? Why aren't you answering me? He reached out and gently wiped away the tears on her face. To me, you are Shen Manting, and Shen Manting is you. I can't treat you as two different people. Manting, you're the mother of my child, and you're my wife, he said softly. No. Shen Manting mumbled. She's not your wife. I'm your wife. I love you. She doesn't love you. Don't be fooled. Shen Luoan's heart was pierced once again. Shen Manting sobbed. She grabbed his hand and said, I was the one who put this ring on you. I'll put it on for you again at the wedding next month. As long as you don't want Shen Manting to come back, I can continue to stay by your side. Hubby, I beg you, please love me, okay? Shen Luoan was taken aback. What do you mean? Chapter 21:36. His words were clear and organized. Shen Manting sobbed a little, but she remained calm. She stared into his eyes, as if waiting for his decision. Shen Luoan was still in a daze and found it hard to believe. In other words, it was a choice between two personalities. If he had chosen the original Manting, little Manting would have been obliterated. What if it was the other way around? If he chose young Manting, then the original Manting, would she never be able to come back? However, Shen Manting was still very serious when she said those words. He had always thought that little Manting was innocent and kind. But in the face of such a moment, she could still be so firm and decisive. That's right, in a moment of life and death like this, everyone wanted to survive. This is human nature. Shen Luoan stared at Shen Manting for a long time, then muttered, Must it be like this? Shen Manting saw his hesitation, and tears rolled down her cheeks again. She looked at Shen Luoan and said, Hubby, do you like her more? His voice was choked with sobs, filled with confusion and despair. She tugged at Shen Luoan's clothes and sniffed. Why? Honey, why? Little Manting was very puzzled. I'm the one who loves you. I'm the one who likes you. You like me too. Why did you choose someone else? Even the door couldn't block out the cries of despair. Yi Qianqian couldn't stand it anymore. She handed Little Moon over to Nanny He and quietly walked to the door of the room to observe what was going on inside. The door was ajar, but it just so happened that it covered the position of the bed. The voice came from the bed. Yi Qianqian stretched out her hand to knock on the door. At that moment,
She clearly heard Shen Luo An's voice again. Shen Luo An's voice was a little soft, perhaps because he was quite a distance away from her. He said, I didn't make a choice. To me, Manting is Manting. Manting, be a good girl and don't cry. No. Shen Manting screamed in a hoarse voice. I'm not. Hubby, you know I'm not. Shen Luo An fell silent. Shen Manting's sobbing filled the room. She couldn't stand it any longer. She turned around and picked up her phone to call Shen Jilia. Shen Jilia seemed to be busy. No one picked up the phone. After thinking for a moment, he knocked on the door and said, Big brother, big sister-in-law. Shen Manting's crying subsided a little. Come in, Shen Luoan said. When Yi Qianqian heard that, her hair stood on end. She had been married to Shen Jilia for 2 years, and this was her first time entering Shen Luo An's room. As soon as he walked in, he discovered that Shen Luo An's room was very large. When she walked in, she saw Shen Luo An sitting on the bed and Shen Manting lying on it. Shen Manting's eyes were red and swollen, and she looked very pitiful. Yi Qianqian's heart ached. At the same time, she was a little afraid. The person in front of her was schizophrenic. What if she took it too hard and stabbed her? I heard that the emotions of mental patients are very unstable. Cough cough. Yi Qianqian walked over and said sheepishly, Manting, didn't you say that you wanted to take the baby to the amusement park? Little Moon is already urging you to go. Chapter 21:37. Wow, he's quite organized. Yi Qianqian thought to herself. She quickly stepped forward and said, Then you have to apologize to Little Moon. As an adult you have to set a good example. Shen Manting wiped her face and asked, Are my eyes swollen? Yi Qianqian nodded subconsciously, but immediately shook her head. They're just a little red. Shen Manting got out of bed, put on her slippers, and walked out. Shen Luoan's face was gloomy. He looked at Shen Manting's back and said softly, Thank you. It was obvious that he was thanking Yi Qianqian. Yi Qianqian waved her hand and said, There's no need to thank me. But soon, she thought of something and said softly, You have to take care of Manting's emotions. Don't scare the child with her constant changes. Shen Luoan was stunned. He hadn't thought of that. When he heard Yi Qianqian's words, he was deeply convinced. He stood up and was about to go out, but before he could move, he heard Nanny He shouting, Manting, what are you doing? Shen Jilia's heart skipped a beat. Yi Qianqian was also shocked and quickly ran out. When she went out, Nanny He was holding a fruit in one hand and a knife in the other. She looked at them helplessly and stamped her feet anxiously. Go after her. Manting ran away with Little Moon in her arms. Damn it! Yi Qianqian couldn't help but curse. Damn it! That jinx! A black shadow ran quickly beside her. Shen Luoan's footsteps were very fast, and he was soon out of the villa. Yi Qianqian quickly ran after him and took out her cell phone to call Shen Jilia. Shen Luoan quickly ran to the left, and Yi Qianqian ran after him. This time, the call went through. Shen Jilia had just finished a consultation and was taking a sip of water. When he saw his cell phone vibrate, he picked it up and said, I was busy just now. What's wrong? Old Shen, go home quickly. Manting ran away with the child. Shen Jilia's heart skipped a beat. What's going on? Shen Manting didn't run far with the child in her arms. When he saw Shen Luoan and Yi Qianqian run out, Shen Yueshao couldn't help but open his eyes wide. He looked up at Shen Manting and asked in a childish voice, Mommy, are we playing hide-and-seek with Daddy? Shen Manting held the child in her arms and felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction. She hugged the baby tightly and said, Yes, when you see Daddy later, don't say anything. Mommy can only take you home after Daddy chooses Mommy. Oh! Shen Yueshao didn't really understand. Shen Manting wiped away her tears and crouched through the garden of the villa. She walked out the back door with the baby in her arms. Nanny He was still in shock. She quietly hid at the side and watched Shen Manting leave with the baby. She quickly followed after her. She quietly picked up her phone and dialed Shen Luoan's number. However, it seemed that Shen Luoan didn't bring his cell phone with him, so no one answered. Seeing that Shen Manting was getting further and further away,
Nanny he panicked and shouted, "Little Moon, come back!" Shen Manting froze when she heard this. When she turned around and saw Nanny he, she quickly picked up Little Moon and ran forward. Seeing this, Nanny he hurriedly chased after her and shouted, "Manting, stop running! Where are you going with Little Moon? Come back!" The weather in the imperial capital was still a little cold at this time. Shen Manting was only wearing a thin spring skirt, which made her look very thin. A gust of wind blew, and she could only shiver with the baby in her arms. Chapter 21:38. Shen Manting looked back. Nanny he's figure was indescribably old. At this moment, she was running behind her at a very slow pace and seemed to be struggling. Shen Manting suddenly felt a little sorry for her and kept looking back. When she saw Nanny he following her across the road, she finally couldn't help but shout, "Nanny he, you should go back." "I'll go back later. I'm just scaring him." When Nanny he heard this, she suddenly felt relieved. She looked at her with a helpless expression and shouted, "What's the use of scaring him? Come back quickly. Don't catch a cold later." "I'm happy," Shen Manting shouted with a sob in her voice. "I'm feeling uncomfortable. What's wrong with taking our son out for a walk?" Nanny he felt even more helpless when she saw how confident she was. The sun was a little bright. Nanny he squinted and covered her eyes with her hand. She shouted, "Stop running. My old arms and legs can't take it. Come back quickly. Young master will be worried if you catch a cold." "No." Shen Manting was very stubborn. She held the baby and pouted. "He doesn't love me." Shen Yueshao saw that his mother was crying and raised his little hand to wipe her eyes. He whispered, "Don't cry, Mommy." Shen Manting felt even more wronged and her tears flowed even more fiercely. She said, "Baby, if Daddy and Mommy aren't together anymore, will you go with Daddy or Mommy?" Little Moon was a little confused and at the same time a little confused. Why would they not be together anymore? He blinked his big dark eyes and asked, "Mommy, did you quarrel with Daddy?" When Shen Manting heard this, her tears suddenly turned into laughter. "I've learned everything from you. You even know what quarreling means." Little Moon didn't quite understand what Shen Manting meant by crying and laughing at the same time, but it seemed that she was praising him. The little fellow waved her arms happily and looked back with a grin. Suddenly, his eyes widened and he shouted, "Daddy!" Shen Manting was shocked and turned her head. She saw Shen Luo, and running in her direction. Shen Manting suddenly panicked. She was like a child who had been caught doing something wrong. She was so scared that she burst into tears. She immediately ran forward with the baby in her arms. But Shen Manting was wearing slippers and didn't even wear socks. His feet slipped from the oversized slippers to the ground, and the sharp pebbles pierced his soles. Shen Manting cried out in pain and shouted, "Don't chase me! Don't chase me!" But why would Shen Luoan listen? Shen Luoan was 1.8 meters tall and had long arms and legs. Shen Manting couldn't outrun him in the first place. "Daddy!" Little Moon stretched out his arms to receive his father's embrace when he saw Shen Luoan carrying him. Shen Luoan was still in a state of shock. He took his son in his arms and checked him from head to toe. He heaved a sigh of relief when he found that there was nothing wrong with him. When he looked down, he saw Shen Manting hugging her feet and crying bitterly. Her cries were not soft and attracted the gazes of the few pedestrians on the street. Shen Luoan had no choice but to squat down and say, "Let me see." Shen Manting cried even more fiercely. She sat on the ground and hugged her feet. She had no intention of responding to him at all. Shen Luoan felt a headache coming on. He didn't allow her to argue. He reached out and pried her hand away, then pulled her feet over. She turned the soles of her feet toward herself. The red bloodstains on the soles of her feet were very eye-catching. Chapter 21:39. Even when he said such words, his voice was stiff. Shen Manting cried even louder. She kicked him with her foot and said, "You don't love me anymore. I should have just left with our son. Why did you come out to look for me?" The surrounding wind was a little chilly, and he was worried that his wife and child would catch a cold. But when he heard what his wife said, he suddenly laughed. Shen Manting felt guilty and sobbed a little. She wiped her eyes and said angrily,
What are you laughing at? I'm laughing at how cute my wife is. Shen Luoan reached out and rubbed her head. Then he pulled her up and said, Let's go home. My heart will ache if you freeze. The childish Shen Manting needed to be coaxed. This way of getting along was the most appropriate and harmonious way for them to get along. Shen Manting felt that he was back. She sobbed and stood up. She stretched out her arms, waiting for him to hug her. Shen Luoan smiled and lifted her up in his arms. It was a classic princess carry. Shen Manting wrapped her arms around his neck and suddenly burst out laughing. Shen Luoan's heart was filled with tenderness. He looked at the little woman in front of him with a smile and said softly, You're not angry anymore? Humph. Shen Manting turned her head away, her body trembling as she cried. Nanny, he finally caught up with them. She panted and shouted, Young people run fast. Come on, little Yuer, let's go home. Little Moon pouted enviously as he looked at Shen Luoan and Shen Manting. He also wanted Daddy to hug him. Nanny, he could read the child's mind at a glance. She chuckled and said, Go home first. Beep beep, the sound of a steam whistle. The familiar Porsche stopped beside them. The window of the driver's seat was rolled down, and Shen Jilia's face was revealed. When Shen Jilia saw them, he heaved a sigh of relief and said, Get in the car. Don't catch a cold. Shen Luoan had no objections. He carried his wife to the back seat. Nanny, he carried the little fellow into the front passenger seat. She was only a short distance from home. When she got home, Yi Qianqian was pacing back and forth in front of her house. When she saw that Shen Jilia had returned with so many people, she heaved a sigh of relief. After Shen Jilia parked the car, Yi Qianqian immediately went up to him and whispered, Did Big Brother tell you? F***CK. You scared me to death. His family's conditions were limited. Shen Jilia could only inquire about Shen Manting's condition in Shen Luoan's relatively clean and spacious room. After understanding the situation, Shen Jilia had a rough idea of the situation. The way he asked the question was very clever. Shen Manting didn't realize that she was being treated as a patient at all. The meeting ended easily. When Shen Jilia walked out, Shen Luoan was playing with a new puzzle with his son. The 24-grid map of Huaxia. Shen Jilia glanced at it and said, Brother, come to my room for a while. Yi Qianqian heard it too and quickly stood up. I'll go too. Shen Jilia glanced at it and didn't have any objections. He quickly entered the room. Yi Qianqian was the last to enter. She closed the door behind her and waited for Shen Jilia's diagnosis. How is it? Shen Luoan asked. This situation is rather rare. Sister-in-law seems to understand Sister Manting's emotions very well, she said as she took out a notebook. Now there are two of them. Let's call them Big Manting and Little Manting. Shen Luoan and Yi Qianqian looked over. Big Manting doesn't seem to know about Little Manting's existence, but Little Manting is the opposite. She can even predict when she will wake up. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.